You've been holding on too tightly, to the past, to who you think you are, to what should have happened, to the people who left, the dreams that faded, the things you can't control. And it's exhausting, isn't it? The constant thinking, the overanalyzing, the trying to fix, to change, to understand. But the more you try to hold on, the heavier it all becomes. They told you peace comes from getting closure, from making everything perfect, from figuring it all out. But if that were true, why do you still feel restless when everything seems okay on the outside? The truth is, peace doesn't come from control. It comes from letting go. Letting go of the need to know, letting go of the tight grip on who you think you should be, letting go of the story playing on repeat in your mind. And Buddhist wisdom has been whispering this secret for over 500 years. Not in complex rituals, not in unreachable perfection, but in quiet simplicity, in breath, in presence, in seeing that what you cling to is what hurts you most. Tonight, as you hear these words, something will shift. The noise in your head will begin to fade. The ache in your chest will soften. You'll feel space inside you, a gentle emptiness, not of loss, but of freedom. This isn't just another audio. This is the beginning of release, of exhale, of freedom from the thoughts that keep you awake at night. You're not here to fix everything. You're here to let go. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've tried everything: schedules, plans, vision boards, affirmations, control disguised as productivity. You've tightened your grip on life, hoping it would finally settle down, finally make sense. But something inside still feels tense, tired. As if no matter how much you organize or prepare, life keeps slipping between your fingers like water. And the more you try to hold it together, the more it breaks apart. You've been taught that control equals safety, that if you just try hard enough, plan smart enough, think fast enough, you can avoid pain, avoid mistakes, avoid the unknown. But deep down, a quiet truth lingers. Control was never yours to begin with. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a problem. Maybe that's the path to peace. The Buddha didn't teach surrender as weakness. He taught it as the doorway to a deeper kind of freedom. Not the freedom to manipulate the world, but the freedom to no longer be trapped by the need to. Letting go isn't giving up. It's giving into the truth of what is. Most people misunderstand surrender. They think it means becoming passive, indifferent, or helpless. But in Buddhism, surrender means seeing clearly. It's the courage to stop fighting what's already happening and start flowing with it. Not because you don't care, but because you care more wisely. You still show up, still take action, but from a different place. Not panic, not force, but presence. When you let go of control, you return to no-and. Now is the only place peace has ever lived. It begins with awareness. Most of us don't realize how much we try to control. We don't just plan our day, we try to control people's opinions, outcomes, even emotions. We rehearse conversations in our head before they happen. We cling to our preferences, expecting the world to line up just right for us to feel okay. The problem isn't in making plans. The problem is believing those plans guarantee something. The Buddha called this attachment to outcome. We assume that if we do things a certain way, the results should follow. But life doesn't work like a machine. It's not a vending machine where you press a button and get what you ordered. It's a river, always moving, always shifting. Letting go doesn't mean stopping your effort. It means releasing the illusion that your effort controls everything. That illusion is what creates stress, anxiety, and burnout. When you believe you're responsible for managing everything, you live in constant fear of failure. You second-guess yourself, overthink, spiral into pressure. The weight gets heavier and heavier, and peace feels further away. Surrender is setting that weight down. It's saying, I'll give my best, I'll show up fully, but I release the outcome. It's trusting that even when things don't go your way, they might still be going the right way. This trust doesn't appear overnight. It grows through practice. At first, letting go feels terrifying, like stepping off a ledge, but slowly you realize the ledge was never solid to begin with. It was a story, a belief that control meant security. Once that illusion starts to dissolve, something softer appears underneath, a quiet presence, a stability that doesn't depend on external success or perfection. The Buddha taught about impermanence not to scare us, but to free us. When you truly understand that everything changes emotions, relationships, health, money, you stop gripping so tightly. You stop clinging to things as if they'll stay the same forever. And that loosening is what brings relief. When you let go of control, you gain access to wisdom. Because your mind isn't busy fighting reality. It's open, clear, responsive. You're able to adapt, to listen, to act without fear. This is what Buddhists call right effort. Not frantic pushing, but mindful action rooted in the present, not chained to outcome. Letting go doesn't mean nothing matters. It means you stop confusing control with care. It means you start living with life instead of against it. Many people stay stuck in control because of fear that if they don't hold on, things will fall apart. But ironically, it's the controlling that makes life feel like a constant crisis. You can't enjoy a moment you're trying to control. It always feels fragile, like it might disappear any second, so you never relax, never trust, never breathe fully. When you loosen your grip, the moment becomes enough. You stop needing it to prove anything. It doesn't have to meet your expectations or lead to something else. It just gets to be, and so do you. This shift isn't just spiritual, it's biological. Neuroscience shows that when we let go of control, even temporarily, our nervous system starts to calm. The fight or flight response begins to quiet. The body shifts into repair mode. The mind softens. We think more clearly, feel more stable, sleep more deeply. This is what Buddhists describe as the fruits of practicing not enlightenment in the clouds, but presence in the now. Letting go is a practice of the body, not just the mind. That's why breath is so central in meditation. Breath reminds you, you don't control everything. You can't force every inhale. Sometimes you have to let the body breathe itself. You have to trust the rhythm. That trust starts small. Letting go doesn't mean handing your life to chaos. It means noticing where you're clenching, where you're forcing, where you're pushing too hard and softening. It means asking, is this mine to control? And if not, releasing it. You can still have goals, still dream, but you hold those dreams gently, not desperately. You walk the path without dragging the future behind you like a heavy chain. You learn to respond instead of react. You learn to listen instead of control. There's a famous Zen story about a man hanging from a cliff by a branch. Above him, tigers wait to devour him. Below, a fall to certain death. As he hangs there, he notices a wild strawberry growing nearby. He reaches out with one hand and eats it, and it's the sweetest strawberry he's ever tasted. This is the power of letting go, not escaping danger or solving every problem, but being fully here anyway, savoring the sweetness even in uncertainty, feeling the moment, not resisting it. It's not a rejection of reality, it's a return to it. You stop trying to rearrange the world to fit your mind. Instead, you let your mind rest in the world as it is. And from there, you discover a kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything staying the same. Buddhist monks spend years training in this, but not because they're avoiding life, quite the opposite. They're learning to live fully with nothing clutched, nothing feared. And over time, the mind transforms. The need to control begins to fade, and what takes its place is clarity, compassion, stability. These aren't just poetic ideas, they're tools for daily life. When someone criticizes you, do you try to control their opinion, or do you breathe, listen, and respond with awareness? When your plans fall apart, do you panic and scramble, or do you pause and trust there's another way forward? Every moment is a practice, not of perfection, but of release. Each time you feel that urge to force something, pause, notice it, don't shame it, just ask, what if I let go instead? What happens when you stop grasping? You make space, space for insight, for creativity, for peace. Control is tight, surrender is spacious. And in that space, new possibilities arise you couldn't have predicted because you weren't trying to script them. There's something deeply healing about letting life surprise you. When you control less, you see more. You begin to notice what's actually happening, not just what you want to happen. And sometimes, what's happening is better than anything you could have planned. Of course, this doesn't mean you won't struggle. There will still be moments of fear, grief, frustration. But when you're not trying to control those feelings, you can actually feel them and let them move through. They don't get stuck. They don't become identity. They pass, like everything else. This is one of Buddhism's most profound insights. Everything that arises, passes. Nothing stays. Not joy, not pain, not success, not failure. So why cling? Why try to trap the wind? Letting go brings you back to humility, to the truth that you are not the center of the universe. And that's a relief. You're a part of something vast, alive, mysterious. You don't need to run the show. You just need to participate, to show up, to stay present. Control is about fear. Letting go is about trust. Not blind faith, but wise trust, the kind that comes from experience, from seeing again and again that you can survive uncertainty, that the worst moments don't last, that something always comes next. So the practice is simple, but not easy. Soften, pause, trust. Not in a future outcome, but in your ability to meet this moment, whatever it brings. And with each breath, each choice, each step into surrender, you build a different kind of strength. Not the brittle strength of control, but the resilient strength of letting go. This is not weakness. This is the deepest kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to dominate because it already feels whole, the kind that doesn't resist change because it's not afraid of what comes next. When you live from this place, you move through life differently, calmer, lighter, clearer, not because your life is perfect, but because you've stopped trying to make it perfect. You've stopped believing that peace is somewhere else, later, when everything is just right. You've discovered that peace lives here, in this breath, in this letting go. And the more you practice, the more you realize, you don't need control to feel safe. You don't need certainty to rest. You just need to let go and trust the flow. And slowly, you begin to feel lighter. Not because everything outside has changed, but because something inside has shifted. The grip has loosened. The urge to control, to fix, to predict it, softens. You stop holding your breath through life and finally exhale. But then something unexpected happens. Beneath the surface of control, another layer reveals itself, deeper, more subtle. The voice that says, "This is just how I am." The one that clings not to things or outcomes, but to identity, the labels, the roles, the story you've been telling yourself for so long that it feels like the truth. Who would you be without that story? We carry ideas about ourselves like armor, some given to us by others, some forged in pain, some mistaken for personality. I'm the strong one, the anxious one, the smart one, the broken one, the achiever, the victim, the good child, the black sheep. And we wear these labels so long, we forget we ever existed without them. But what if that version of you isn't as solid as it seems? Buddhism teaches that identity is not a fixed thing. It's not a statue carved in stone, but a pattern shaped by memory, reaction, emotion, habit. The self is a process, an ongoing flow. And the moment you try to freeze it, to hold it still, to define it, you suffer. Because life is fluid, but you're trying to stay still inside it. This clinging to identity is a hidden source of struggle. It whispers, "I shouldn't feel this way. I'm not that kind of person." It resists growth because growth threatens the idea of who you think you are. And it resists pain because pain threatens the illusion of control over that image. If you've always seen yourself as the reliable one, burnout becomes shame. If you believe you're weak, success becomes uncomfortable. If you identify as someone who never gets angry, anger turns into denial. And so the story must stay intact even if it costs you your peace. But stories are not the truth. They're interpretations. They're tools. And when you forget their tools, you become their prisoner. This is where the concept of emptiness becomes liberating. Emptiness doesn't mean void or meaningless. It means that things, including the self, don't exist on their own in isolation. Everything is interdependent, including your sense of me, your thoughts, your emotions, your preferences. They're not fixed. They rise and fall based on conditions, like weather patterns. And clinging to them as you only creates confusion. The Buddha didn't say there is no self. He said that what we usually call the self is not solid or permanent. It's a bundle of perceptions, sensations, memories, and tendencies constantly shifting and reshaping. When you realize that, you can loosen your grip. You can stop defending an idea of yourself and start meeting each moment with openness. This changes everything. When identity softens, compassion grows. You're no longer trapped in comparison. You don't have to be better than anyone. You don't have to prove anything. You don't even have to be consistent with the past. You're free to respond to this moment without dragging all your old definitions into it. It also changes how you relate to your flaws. Instead of thinking, "I am anxious," you begin to see, anxiety is present right now. There's space between you and the feeling. You are not the emotion. You are the awareness of it. And awareness is not bound by labels. The suffering begins when you merge with the label. When you say, "This is me," instead of seeing that it's simply what's happening. Your thoughts are not personal. Your patterns are not proof of anything. They're just echoes, learned behavior, conditions passing through awareness. And when you see that, healing becomes possible because you're not defending the pain anymore. You're not trying to protect an identity that says, "I'm the one who always suffers," or "I'm too damaged to change." You're just watching, breathing, and letting the story unfold without clinging to it. This also brings humility. When identity is soft, you're not attached to being right. You can admit mistakes without collapsing. You can grow without guilt. You can meet others without needing to be above or below them. Because you're not performing anymore. You're participating, showing up without pretending. This is why deep Buddhist practice often involves deconstructing the self. Not to erase it, but to loosen its grip, to free you from needing to be anything other than present. The more you examine the self, the more mysterious it becomes, and in that mystery is peace. We often resist this because identity feels like safety. It gives us a script, but safety built on false certainty is fragile. Real safety comes from flexibility, from being able to adapt, to evolve, to let go of who you were yesterday and make space for who you are now. This also shifts your relationship with shame. Shame thrives on fixed identity. It says, "You did something wrong. therefore you are wrong. But when the self is seen as fluid, action is just action. Mistakes are not definitions, they're teachers, lessons, impermanent, like everything else. This view also helps us relate to others with more ease. When you don't need to protect your identity, you don't need to attack anyone else's. You don't need them to agree, to approve, or to validate your story. You can meet people where they are, without demanding that they match your image of yourself. And when others project identities onto you, when they say you're too much or not enough, you don't have to internalize it. You can see it as their lens, not your truth. Their perception, not your prison. It's not about being detached from life. It's about being unburdened by the constant effort to maintain a version of yourself that no longer fits, or never did. So many people spend their lives reinforcing an identity they don't even like because it's familiar. But familiarity isn't the same as freedom. Just because you've always felt anxious doesn't mean you are an anxious person. Just because you were told you're not good enough doesn't mean it's true. These beliefs are inherited, repeated, internalized, but not fixed. You can put them down, you can question them, you can watch them arise without believing them, and that's when something new begins to emerge. A better version of you, but a freer one. A self not built on definition, but on awareness, spacious, open, awake. In Zen practice, there's a phrase, "don't know mind." It's not ignorance, it's freedom from fixation. It's the willingness to meet each moment without needing to carry a label into it. You don't have to be wise or healed or impressive. You just have to be here, attentive, humble. This also frees your creativity. So often, we silence ourselves with identity. I'm not the creative type. I'm not a leader. I don't do that kind of thing. But when those boundaries dissolve, possibility opens. You try new things, speak more honestly, live more fully. Not because you're trying to become someone else, but because you've stopped trying to stay small. Letting go of identity doesn't mean losing who you are. It means losing the tension of trying to be who you are all the time. It means dropping the mask so you can finally breathe. And it allows for joy, spontaneity, wonder. When you're not boxed in by roles and definitions, the world becomes a playground. You're not trying to impress anyone, not even yourself. You're just living, connected, awake. Even suffering changes when identity softens. Pain becomes less personal. You feel it fully, but you don't make it a story about who you are. And because of that, it passes more cleanly, without residue. This is where meditation becomes such a powerful tool. In silence, the self becomes transparent. You see thoughts come and go. You watch feelings rise and fall. And the more you watch, the more you realize, you are not these movements. You are the space they pass through. And that space has no label. You are not your resume. You are not your trauma. You are not your mistakes or your talents or your roles. You are not your best moment or your worst day. You are the awareness in which all of these things arise and fall away. The more you trust this, the less afraid you become. Because if identity is empty, failure can't define you, judgment can't shrink you, and no experience can make you less whole. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop identifying. You live fully, love deeply, give generously, but without needing to make it about you. And in that space, your actions become clearer. You give because giving matters. You speak because truth matters, not because you're trying to be someone. This is what makes Buddhist wisdom so liberating. It doesn't ask you to become something. It invites you to let go of who you think you have to be, so that what's true can reveal itself. And what's true is always here, always now, always changing. You're not a finished product. You're not a brand. You're not a fixed point. You are a living process, a mystery unfolding, and the more gently you hold that, the more peace you'll find in being. Not because you've figured yourself out, but because you've stopped needing to. You're not here to perfect an identity. You're here to remember what you are beneath it, empty and free. And once you no longer hold your identity like a weapon or a shield, something inside begins to soften. You feel space where tension used to live. The pressure to defend, to perform, to be consistent fades. But just as the grip on identity starts to loosen, another kind of weight rises from below, older, heavier, not who you think you are, but what has happened to you, the stories buried in your memory, the emotions stored in silence, the moments you wish never happened, and the ones you replay over and over again. Some wounds don't leave marks on the body, but they live in the mind like shadows. They shape the tone of your thoughts. They tighten your chest. They color the way you see others, and more painfully, the way you see yourself. You may not even notice it at first, but the past is not gone. It lingers. It speaks quietly, but often, and without knowing it, you keep reacting to life through it. Buddhism doesn't ask you to forget the past. It doesn't ask you to pretend that pain didn't happen. Instead, it invites you to change your relationship to it. To see the past clearly, but not carry it as punishment. To let memory be a teacher, not a jailer. To realize that karma is not fate's cause and effect, and effects can change when your awareness changes. Karma is often misunderstood. Many believe it means you get what you deserve, but this view is too narrow and often too harsh. In Buddhist teaching, karma refers to the actions of body, speech, and mind and their consequences. But karma is not fixed, it is fluid. You're not stuck in one storyline forever. You are not doomed to repeat the past if you bring light to it. Karma continues, yes, but so does the possibility of healing it. When you carry unresolved pain, you act from it, not because you want to, but because your system is still shaped by it. Your nervous system becomes trained to expect danger. Your mind becomes trained to defend. Your heart becomes hesitant to open. But these patterns are not you. They are responses, natural ones, conditioned by the past. And conditioning can be softened. The first step is awareness. You can't rewrite the story until you can see the story. You need to notice where your thoughts return when things go quiet, where the emotion rises without warning, where the same reaction repeats even when the situation is new. These are signals from the past, echoing in the present, and once you see them clearly, you can begin to choose differently. Buddhist practice offers tools for this work. Mindfulness helps you observe your experience without immediately reacting to it. It creates space between feeling and action. So when a familiar trigger appears, someone criticizes you, or abandons you, or misunderstands you, you don't have to fall into the same response. You can pause, breathe, observe, and then decide with presence, not memory. This is how karma is rewritten, not by erasing the past, but by changing your response to it. Every time you meet old pain with new awareness, you shift the pattern, you stop feeding the cycle. And slowly, the energy of the past begins to lose its grip. Trauma, too, can live in memory long after the event. Not just in thoughts, but in the body. The tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your breath, the way your heart races, even when there's no danger, that's not weakness. That's memory living in the body. And while Buddhism doesn't replace therapy or medical care, it offers a path to meet those sensations with compassion, to stay present with what's difficult without being swallowed by it. Compassion is essential. Without it, memory becomes harsh. You judge yourself for what you felt, for how you acted, for what you allowed. But judgment only tightens the wound. Compassion, on the other hand, creates space for truth to enter. It doesn't excuse harm, but it understands that pain changes behavior, and that everyone, including you, is doing their best with the awareness they have. Through loving kindness practice, you can begin to send warmth toward parts of yourself that were hurt. The younger self, the confused self, the angry, scared, or silent self. These parts are not your enemy. They are fragments of your experience, waiting to be held, not to be fixed, just to be seen with kindness. And when that happens, they begin to soften. Memory is not just what happened, it's how you carry what happened, and how you carry it can change. The past itself cannot be altered, but your relationship to it can. And when that relationship shifts, the burden becomes lighter. It doesn't mean you forget, it means you remember with more peace. Buddhism also speaks of non-attachment to views. This includes the stories you tell about the past. Often, we narrate our suffering in ways that keep us stuck. We replay it with blame or guilt or shame. But memory is not a fixed recording. It's alive. And through reflection, you can begin to reinterpret the meaning. Instead of, "I was abandoned, so I am unlovable," you might begin to see, "I was abandoned, and I learned how deeply I need connection." Instead of, "I failed, and that means I'm not enough," you might begin to feel, "I failed, and it taught me where I was afraid to try." These are not lies. They are different angles of truth. And choosing the one that brings healing is not denial, it's wisdom. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." This includes the inner world. If your thoughts about the past are soaked in bitterness, fear, or regret, your present becomes shaped by that. But if your thoughts about the past are softened by understanding, then even pain becomes part of your growth. This is not about toxic positivity. It's not pretending that harm didn't hurt. It's about reclaiming your power to choose what meaning you give to the past, because the story is not over, and your awareness is the pen. One powerful practice is journaling with mindfulness, not to rehash everything, but to sit with a painful memory and write from the heart, not about what happened, but about how it lives in you now, what beliefs it left behind, what sensations it brings, and then to question gently, is this still true? Is this still needed? Many people carry pain that was never witnessed. Sometimes, simply acknowledging it brings release. You might find that speaking it aloud in meditation or writing it without filter starts to loosen its hold. The past doesn't just want to be buried. It wants to be known, to be honored, and then to be allowed to move on. Some karmic patterns run deep. You might notice the same type of relationships, the same internal criticisms, the same fears of being seen or left or judged. These are not flaws, they are repetitions. And what repeats can be met with presence, over and over, until it no longer controls you. Each time you catch yourself reacting from an old wound and choose stillness instead, something rewires. Each time you speak with gentleness when the old voice says to shut down, something heals. You are not reliving the past, you are reshaping it. This is why Buddhist practice emphasizes patience. Change happens, but slowly. Patterns don't vanish in one moment of insight. They dissolve over time through awareness, kindness, and repetition. That's not failure. That's how the nervous system learns to feel safe again. Forgiveness can also play a role, not as a demand, but as a release. Forgiveness doesn't mean approval of harm. It means no longer letting that harm define you. It means freeing yourself from carrying what isn't yours. Sometimes that forgiveness is for others. Sometimes it's for yourself. Often it's both. You also learn to trust the intelligence of pain. It's not random. It's trying to show you where attention is needed, not to dwell, but to heal. Pain that's avoided persists. Pain that's met with clarity begins to shift, not instantly, but faithfully. Some past experiences will remain raw. That's okay. Healing is not erasure, it's integration. Making peace with the fact that pain was part of your path, but it doesn't get to steer the rest of it. You're not broken, you're becoming whole. And in that wholeness, there is freedom. Not the kind that forgets the past, but the kind that includes it without being held down by it. You may find yourself in moments where old wounds resurface and, instead of drowning, you remain grounded. That's progress. That's the path. You don't have to unwrite your history, you just have to stop believing it controls your future. The past is not a prophecy, it's a chapter, and you're still writing. Buddhist wisdom gives you permission to begin again, not because the past disappears, but because you've stopped letting it define you. You're not the child who was misunderstood. You're not the partner who was betrayed. You're not the mistake you made when you didn't know better. You are here now, aware, awake, capable of seeing with fresh eyes. The past shaped you, yes, but you are not its prisoner. So you pause, breathe, and unclench. Not to forget, not to erase, but to walk forward, finally free. And once you begin to see the past with new eyes, not as a trap, but as a teacher, you start to feel something unexpected. The sharp edges begin to dull. The grip around old memories loosens. There is movement where there used to be resistance. But just when it seems like healing is near, something deeper pulls you back. A heaviness, a strange comfort in the familiar ache. A quiet refusal to let go completely. The past no longer owns you, yet part of you still clings to the pain. And here lies a more subtle layer that few notice, but many live in. The attachment to suffering. It may sound strange at first. Who would want to suffer? Who would hold on to pain by choice? But Buddhism teaches that suffering is not only something that happens to us, it's also something we participate in, often unconsciously. When we become familiar with pain, it starts to feel safe, not because it's good, but because it's known. Healing asks us to step into the unknown, and that for many feels more frightening than staying hurt. Pain creates identity. It tells a story. It gives the mind something to hold on to. When you've lived with sadness, fear, or guilt for long enough, those feelings start to feel like home. And even if you're miserable there, the idea of leaving can feel disorienting. Who would you be without your suffering? What would fill that space? This is the paradox. Healing is not always blocked by pain itself, but by the fear of what comes after it. The fear of losing the story, the familiarity, even the attention that suffering brings. Some part of the mind resists peace, not because it doesn't want it, but because peace feels unfamiliar. This is where mindfulness becomes essential. Without awareness, resistance hides in plain sight. You might think you're trying to heal, but sabotage your efforts with distraction, self-judgment, or avoidance. You might start the path with good intentions, only to fall back into patterns that keep pain alive. Not because you're weak, but because the part of you that's in pain is still trying to feel safe. Mindfulness reveals this with clarity, not blame. It lets you see when you're feeding a story that no longer serves you. It shows you when you're choosing to relive a wound because it gives you a sense of control. There's no shame in this. It's human. But the moment you see it clearly, you also gain the power to stop. The practice is not to shame yourself for being stuck, it's to sit with the stuckness, to feel the fear that says, if I let this go, I won't know who I am. To meet it gently, to breathe through it, and to remind yourself, you are more than your pain. Sometimes we hold on to suffering because it justifies other behaviors. If you're always hurting, then isolating, snapping at others, or not trying can feel understandable. The pain becomes a permission slip to not engage fully with life. But over time, this way of living shrinks you. It turns life into a series of defenses. And mindfulness slowly breaks those walls, not with force, but with truth. You notice the moment you tighten your chest to avoid feeling joy, the moment you distract yourself when calm starts to settle in. You begin to see the habits that keep you cycling back to discomfort, not because you love it, but because it feels like part of who you are. There is often grief in healing. Not just grief for what happened, but grief for what you must leave behind. And this includes the identity shaped by suffering. It includes the attention that pain may have brought, the sense of being special or deserving sympathy. These are not bad things, but they can anchor you to pain if you're not aware. Letting go of suffering doesn't mean you stop acknowledging it. It means you stop centering your life around it. You stop defining your worth by how much you've endured. You stop letting old wounds dictate what you believe is possible for you. You allow space for a new kind of life, one that isn't built on survival, but on presence. There's also the challenge of doubt. When pain has been with you for a long time, peace can feel suspicious, like it's temporary, like it doesn't belong to you. So you push it away before it can leave on its own. You tell yourself you're not ready, or you question the peace until it collapses. This is where Buddhist teachings about impermanence become helpful again. Peace, like everything else, comes and goes. But so does suffering. You don't need either to last forever. You just need to stop clinging, to stop chasing one or running from the other. Both will pass, and in the space between, you find freedom. Many also resist healing because it means taking responsibility, not for what happened, but for what happens next. As long as you stay hurt, you can point backward. You can avoid stepping into your power. But healing calls you into agency. It asks you to respond, to participate, to stop waiting for someone else to make it better. And this can be confronting. Power brings choice, choice brings risk, but choice also brings freedom. And mindfulness helps you use that power wisely, not to control, but to care. To meet each moment with honesty, and to choose what supports your well-being, not what keeps you safely stuck. Another hidden layer of attachment to suffering is moral identity. Sometimes we believe our pain makes us good, that being hurt makes us deep, or wise, or worthy of love. But these qualities don't require suffering. You can be deep without drowning, wise without brokenness, kind without carrying the world's weight. The path is not about removing pain, it's about no longer needing it to feel real, to feel worthy, to feel loved. Pain will still arise, life will still bring challenges, but you'll stop using it to build your identity. There's also the subtle belief that healing is betrayal, that if you stop suffering, you're minimizing what happened, that you're letting someone off the hook. But forgiveness, like healing, is not for them. It's for you. You can acknowledge pain fully and still choose not to be defined by it. That is not betrayal, that is liberation. Buddhism teaches that clinging is the root of suffering. And yes, that includes clinging to suffering itself. The more we identify with pain, the more we suffer when it shifts, because even our sadness feels like something we're afraid to lose. But freedom lies in letting it move, in not needing to suffer to feel alive. Mindfulness helps because it brings the present into focus. When you are fully here, the past loosens, the drama softens. You stop needing to carry old pain like armor. You sit, you breathe. You notice your thoughts, but don't merge with them. And over time, you begin to trust that you are okay, even without the suffering that once felt like home. This doesn't happen all at once. There will be days when the pain calls you back, when the comfort of the familiar feels safer than the openness of peace. But awareness gives you the power to choose again. You can see the pull and say no. You can feel the fear and stay anyway. You can notice the sabotage and respond with care. One of the most powerful acts of healing is allowing joy. Not because you're ignoring pain, but because you're not only pain, You're still here, still breathing, still capable of love, creativity, stillness. And when you begin to let joy back in, the attachment to suffering starts to loosen on its own. You're not here to repeat old pain forever. You're here to notice it, learn from it, and move through it. And yes, part of you may resist that. That's okay. Just see it. Sit with it. Let it speak, but don't let it lead. Healing is not a finish line. It's a relationship. A choice you keep making. Each time you soften toward yourself. Each time you step away from the story that says pain is your only truth. Each time you let go, not because you're over it, but because you're ready for more. There is nothing noble about staying in pain longer than you need to. You do not have to suffer endlessly to prove you were hurt. You do not need to stay broken to be lovable. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to release. You are allowed to feel peace, even if no one apologized, even if no one understood, even if you don't know what comes next. Suffering may have shaped you, but it does not have to hold you. And the moment you stop feeding it, something else begins to grow. A version of you that is not built on wounds but on awareness, on care, on choice. So take a breath, not because everything is fixed, but because you are allowed to feel something other than pain. Let the weight fall away, not in denial, but in truth. You were never meant to carry it forever. You were meant to outgrow it. And now, you are. And when you begin to loosen your grip on suffering, not just the pain itself, but the identity that grew from it, something inside feels less tangled. You find you no longer need pain to define you, no longer crave the weight of it to feel real. But even in that spaciousness, a quieter force often lingers beneath the surface. Not as heavy, not as obvious, but just as limiting. It's the craving for control over what comes next, the attachment to outcomes, the constant reaching toward a future that never quite arrives. This is one of the most deeply ingrained habits of the mind. The belief that peace will come after success, after recognition, after approval, after the goal is achieved. And so life becomes a long hallway of waiting. You move from one moment to the next with a subtle tension in your chest, a quiet whisper of, "Not yet." Even when you're doing something meaningful, part of you is watching the horizon, hoping for a result that will finally let you rest. This is outcome addiction, a craving not for things themselves, but for what we believe those things will give us. It shows up as pressure, as urgency, as dissatisfaction with the now. And it is exhausting, because no outcome, no matter how beautiful, can hold your peace forever. Eventually the joy fades, the excitement wears off, and you're left chasing again. Buddhism offers a different path, a quieter, more grounded way of being. It teaches us about non-attached intention, acting with clarity and care, but without clinging to what should happen next. It's not passivity, it's not indifference, it's engagement without obsession, action without anxiety, doing without depending. Non-attached intention begins by shifting where your focus lives. Instead of constantly asking, "What will this lead to?" you begin to ask, "How am I showing up right now?" You bring your energy to the quality of your presence, not the outcome of your performance. And in that shift, something liberating happens. You start to feel more alive in what you're doing, not just in what you hope it becomes. This doesn't mean you give up on goals or desires. Desire is part of being human, wanting to grow, to create, to contribute. That's natural. But suffering begins when desire turns into grasping, when wanting turns into needing, when your happiness becomes hostage to things going a certain way. That's when peace gets pushed out of reach. Non-attachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care without fear. You care without losing your center. You care without bargaining with the universe. You still plant seeds, but you stop demanding that every seed bloom exactly when and how you want it to. You trust the process, you trust the timing, and most importantly, you stay rooted in the moment instead of running ahead in your mind. This approach transforms how you work, how you love, how you grow. In work, it means giving your best without burning out to prove your worth. In relationships, it means showing up fully without manipulating someone into being who you need them to be. In your growth, it means practicing, evolving, exploring without punishing yourself for not arriving fast enough. You also begin to notice how often the mind spins stories about the future. If this happens, then I'll be happy. If it doesn't work out, I'll fall apart. These thoughts are not truth, they're habits. And mindfulness helps you see them clearly. You watch the craving for guarantees. You notice the fear of failure. And instead of obeying those voices, you return to now. Outcome attachment is rooted in the illusion of control. The belief that if you try hard enough, stress enough, prepare enough, you can force the future into your shape. But the future isn't a machine. It's a living, breathing unfolding. And the more you try to grip it, the more it slips through your hands. Letting go of outcome doesn't mean you stop dreaming. It means you stop outsourcing your peace to the dream. You begin to ask deeper questions. Not, will this work out, but, is this aligned with my values? Not, what do I get from this, but, who am I becoming through this? And in asking better questions, you live a better life. There's also a freedom in knowing that outcomes are never fully in your hands. You can influence, you can shape, but you cannot guarantee. There are too many variables, too many moving parts. And once you accept that, you stop trying to bend the world to your will. You start dancing with it instead. This mindset also builds resilience, because when things don't go your way, you don't collapse. You don't see failure as a verdict on your worth. You see it as part of the process, part of the learning. You make space for detours, for surprises, even for disappointment. And in that space, you stay calm, you stay grounded. Mindfulness supports this shift deeply. Every time you bring your attention back to the breath, you're practicing non-attachment. You're choosing presence over prediction. When thoughts about the future arise, you notice them. You don't chase them. You don't fight them. You just return again and again. And through that repetition, your relationship with the future begins to change. You also start to discover joy in the process, not just in the reward. You begin to taste the richness of effort, the beauty of small steps. You notice how a kind word feels just as meaningful as a grand achievement. How a quiet moment of clarity can feel more fulfilling than a public success. Because your joy is no longer delayed. It's here, available. There's a quiet confidence that grows from this, a sense of inner safety. Because your well-being is no longer at the mercy of things going perfectly, you carry it with you. Not because everything is certain, but because you've stopped needing certainty to feel okay. This changes how you relate to others as well. When you're not obsessed with outcomes, you stop trying to control people. You stop needing them to behave a certain way to validate your choices. You stop using them as mirrors for your success. You begin to honor their journey as separate from yours. And that brings peace into connection. In Buddhism, this way of living is supported by the Eightfold Path, especially the practice of right effort and right intention. Right effort is not about pushing, it's about balance. Energy rooted in compassion, not desperation. Right intention is about acting from wisdom, not ego. When you act from these places, you can release the need to control what happens next. There's also a letting go of entitlement. Outcome addiction is often tied to the belief that certain results are owed to you if you try hard enough. But life doesn't work on transactions. It works on interconnection. Your effort matters, but so do timing, causes, and the efforts of others. When you release entitlement, you make room for gratitude, for humility, for grace. This doesn't mean you don't feel disappointment. You do, but you meet it gently. You don't let it harden you. You don't turn it into a personal failure. You let it be what it is, a feeling. You feel it fully, and then you move forward with care. Non-attached intention also strengthens your integrity. When you're not fixated on results, you're more likely to act in alignment with your values, even when it's hard, because you're not chasing shortcuts. You're not manipulating outcomes. You're choosing what feels true, even if it's slower, quieter, or less impressive to others. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you always succeed, but because you know you're showing up with clarity, with presence, with heart. And that trust becomes a foundation, a home you can return to no matter what life brings. This is not about giving up on change. It's about letting go of the illusion that you must suffer your way into transformation. You can grow without grinding yourself into exhaustion. You can dream without clinging. You can strive without needing the end to justify the path. And maybe, in letting go of outcomes, you open the door to outcomes that are even better than what you imagined. Because you're not limiting yourself to one version of success. You're open to life's intelligence, to the wisdom of not knowing. You stop needing guarantees. You stop needing validation. You start trusting the rhythm, showing up with full presence, and letting go of what you thought it had to lead to. That is the quiet power of non-attached intention. It doesn't look loud from the outside, but inside it's steady, free, alive. So you continue on your path. You keep planting seeds, watering them, nurturing them, and instead of standing over them, demanding they bloom on your schedule, you step back, breathe, and let them grow in their own time. And in that spaciousness, you find peace. You find freedom. You find yourself. And when the grip around outcomes loosens, life begins to breathe again. You no longer chase every moment for what it might become. You stop measuring your worth by how things unfold. Instead, you show up fully, without needing the future to reward you for being here. But as that tension fades, something more tender often rises to the surface. Not a craving for what's next, but a quiet ache for what's no longer here. Beneath all the striving and control, there is often a hidden sorrow, a weight of loss we've tried to outrun. The people, the places, the versions of ourselves we had to say goodbye to. And when the noise of wanting fades, we finally begin to feel it. Grief. Grief is not a mistake. It's not a failure of the heart. It's a natural response to love and impermanence meeting each other. It arises not just from death, but from all forms of letting go. From life moving on without permission, from relationships shifting, from dreams dissolving, from moments that can't be relived. It is the body's way of honoring what mattered. But grief is difficult, not just because of its weight, but because of our confusion around it. We often don't know how to hold it. We either try to silence it, distract from it, or drown in it. We treat it like something to conquer or avoid, yet Buddhism offers a different way. It teaches that grief is not something to be erased, but something to be fully met with compassion, with honesty, and with presence. When we deny grief, it doesn't disappear. It settles in the body. It hides behind anger, behind numbness, behind distraction. When we try to be strong by avoiding sadness, we lose a part of our softness. We lose access to the depth that grief offers. Because grief, when allowed to move, becomes a bridge not only to healing, but to love. Buddhist teachings on impermanence help us understand this. Everything we love will change. Everything we know will pass. This is not said to create fear, but to awaken tenderness, to remind us that life is precious precisely because it doesn't last, that love is meaningful not in spite of endings, but because of them. Grief arises because we have touched something real, and when we allow ourselves to feel it, we honor what was. We give space for the memory to live in use not as a wound, but as something sacred. The pain of loss often sharpens our sense of identity. We say, "I lost my parent, my friend, my future." And while grief always feels personal, it is also something deeply universal. Every being who loves will one day grieve. We are not alone in it. We are joined by generations of hearts who have also broken open, who have also learned to carry absence with reverence. Mindfulness can help us hold grief without collapsing. It teaches us to stay with each feeling as it arises, without needing to fix or flee. We notice the wave of sadness without drowning in it. We feel the tightness in the throat, the heaviness in the limbs, the sharp sting of memory, and we meet each one with care. There is no right timeline for grief, no clean path. It moves in its own rhythm, sometimes crashing in, sometimes stepping back, sometimes quiet, sometimes overwhelming. The practice is not to control it, but to welcome it as it comes. To stop measuring our healing by how quickly we move on, and instead ask how fully we are able to stay present with what is here. Buddhism teaches that clinging creates suffering. This includes clinging to the past. When we try to keep things exactly as they were, we block the natural flow of grief. We freeze moments that were meant to move. But letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean loving less. It means allowing the love to take new shape beyond form, beyond time. When someone we love dies, the relationship doesn't end. It transforms. It becomes part of us in a different way. The voice may no longer speak, but the teachings remain. The hands may no longer hold, but the warmth lives in memory. This transformation is only possible when we let grief move, when we let it change us instead of trying to stay the same. We also grieve for parts of ourselves, the version of us that existed before loss, the one who didn't know this kind of emptiness. And that grief is real too. Healing means not only accepting the loss of another, but also the loss of who we were before them, before the goodbye, before the silence. And in that acceptance, we make space for something new to take root. There is also a tendency to compare pain, to believe some losses are worth grieving and others are not. But every form of loss is worthy of attention, a missed opportunity, a friendship that faded, a part of your body that changed. Grief doesn't ask for permission. It simply shows up where there was once care, and when we meet it fully, it becomes less of a burden and more of a guide. One of the powerful shifts that occurs through Buddhist insight is recognizing that grief is not separate from love. It is love, enduring beyond form. It is the echo of connection in the space where it used to live. And when we stop trying to push it away, we start to feel that love again, not in the way we expected, not in the way we long for, but in a way that keeps the heart soft. Meditation can support this process. Sitting with grief, not thinking about it, but feeling it directly without narrative, without defense, allows it to move. Even tears, when welcomed, become medicine. The body knows how to release. We just need to give it the silence to do so. Sometimes grief brings guilt for surviving, for feeling joy again, for not being able to save someone, for things left unsaid. But guilt is not a debt to be paid. It is a signal that we are trying to carry too much, that we are confusing responsibility with regret. And Buddhism teaches that compassion begins with ourselves, that we are allowed to release what we were never meant to hold. Letting go of guilt doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care wisely. It means you stop punishing yourself for being human, for not knowing then what you know now, for continuing to live even when others could not. That too is sacred. That too is love. In time, grief softens, not because the loss is less, but because your relationship with it deepens. You begin to hold it not as something broken, but as something woven into the fabric of your life. A quiet presence, a shadow that sometimes stretches long, but always reminds you of where the light once was and still is. Rituals can help, not to make grief disappear, but to give it a form. Lighting a candle, writing a letter, speaking aloud to someone no longer here, creating a space where the heart can speak without fear, where the memories can breathe without needing to be resolved. There is also wisdom in not rushing to explain grief, not trying to make it poetic or profound. Sometimes it's just a deep, aching silence, and that too is holy. Not everything needs to be turned into insight right away. Some truths arrive slowly, over years, through the quiet patience of not turning away. Grief teaches us that presence is the most precious thing we have, that nothing can be taken for granted, that love is not about holding tightly, but about being here fully. And the more we live with that understanding, the more gently we move through the world. We start to listen more, to pause more, to look into someone's eyes and really see them, because we know how quickly it can all change, and that knowing is not only sorrow, it is beauty. The kind of beauty that aches because it is real. As grief continues its slow unfolding, it stops being something you need to heal from and becomes something you live with, like a river beside you, sometimes calm, sometimes rushing, but always flowing. And as you walk beside it, you learn to respect its rhythm. You learn that pain and peace can coexist, that missing someone and being okay can happen at the same time. You stop waiting to be the person you were before. You start becoming someone new, not because you've moved on, but because you've allowed yourself to move forward with love, with memory, with space for what remains. This is the liberation of grief. Not freedom from feeling, but freedom from fighting it. Freedom from the belief that you must be unchanged to be whole. You begin to trust that life continues not as a replacement, but as a continuation, that you are still allowed to smile, to grow, to open, even with the ache. And as grief becomes less of a wound and more of a thread in your heart, you begin to see others differently too. You recognize the quiet weight behind their words. You hold their sorrow with more care, because you've touched your own and found that it did not break you, it opened you. So you keep walking, not away from loss, but with it, hand in hand, heart in heart. And step by step, it teaches you not just about what you've lost, but about what you still have, what you can still give, what you are still here to feel. And in that feeling, life begins again, not as it was, but as it is now, honest, whole, and deeply alive. And as you learn to carry grief not as a burden, but as part of your path, you also begin to understand that endings are not always tied to death. Some losses come in the form of change. Some are choices you have to make, goodbyes that are quiet, uncelebrated, even unspoken. People who were once close but can no longer walk beside you. Relationships that were once safe but have become heavy. Connections that brought meaning but now bring confusion, resentment, or pain. Letting go of someone still alive is one of the hardest things the heart will ever do, especially when love is still present in some form. There's often no clear line, no perfect moment, no sharp break. Just a slow, difficult truth rising into view. This relationship, in its current form, is no longer aligned with your growth, your peace, or your well-being. And yet, walking away feels like betrayal, like giving up, like abandoning the very love that once held you. But Buddhism teaches that compassion is not just for holding on. It is also for knowing when to release with care, with honesty, and without cruelty, to walk away not with anger, but with meta-loving kindness. Not because the connection didn't matter, but because it did. Metta is not about staying in what hurts you. It is about wishing well, even when paths diverge. It is the quiet strength that allows you to honor both your boundaries and your heart at the same time. And this is where true compassion begins, not in clinging to what no longer fits, but in letting go with tenderness instead of blame. Sometimes people grow in different directions. What once felt like harmony becomes tension. What once felt supportive becomes limiting. And when that shift happens, the mind often fights it. It tries to hold on to the history, the potential, the idea of who this person was or could be. But presence asks something different. It asks you to see what is clearly, without delusion. And from that clarity, to make a choice that honors the truth. Choosing to leave a relationship or to step back from someone you care about doesn't mean you failed. It means you listened deeply, that you valued your peace enough to protect it, that you understood love is not measured by endurance alone. Staying is not always love. Sometimes love says, gently, I cannot continue like this. This is not selfish. This is care in its mature form. Because when we stay in resentment, or when we give more than we can sustain, we don't actually serve the relationship, we begin to damage it. And both people suffer. Walking away, when done with awareness and heart, can be the most loving act available. Metta practice teaches us to send well wishes to all beings, including those with whom we struggle. And that includes those we need to leave. It does not require that we forget pain or ignore harm. It asks us to hold the full truth of someone, both their beauty and their brokenness, without hate. It allows space for honest boundaries and open-hearted goodbye to coexist. You can love someone deeply and still choose distance. You can wish them healing while stepping out of the story. You can honor what you shared while releasing the grip on what it used to be. This is a practice of wholeness. It invites you to stop dividing your heart into right and wrong, into loyalty and escape, and to instead act from the stillness beneath it all. Often, we resist goodbye because we confuse closure with harmony. We wait for the other person to understand, to agree, to validate the ending. But closure doesn't always come in words. It doesn't always come with permission. Sometimes, it is the quiet moment you give yourself when you stop arguing with reality and allow the ending to be what it is. The mind wants tidy endings, but the heart knows that many endings are messy, incomplete, unfinished. Buddhism teaches us to live in the in-between, to let go, not when it feels easy, but when it feels true. Even when there are questions left unanswered, even when there is still love. This is where loving kindness becomes not just a feeling, but a decision, a discipline, to continue wishing well, even when connection is no longer possible, not for them alone, but for yourself. So you don't carry bitterness into the next chapter. So you don't build walls where you meant to build space. Saying goodbye with metta does not mean denying your hurt. It means meeting it with warmth. It means tending to your own pain with gentleness instead of turning it into blame. It means holding grief with an open palm, not clinging, not closing off, but letting it pass through you like weather. And sometimes you need to walk away not because of who they are, but because of who you become when you stay. If being near someone constantly pulls you out of alignment, drains your energy, or closes your heart, it is an act of love to step away. Because your presence matters, your peace matters. Your inner balance is not optional, it is sacred. This becomes clearer the more you practice mindfulness. You begin to feel the subtle shifts in your energy when you are around certain people. You notice how some relationships expand you, while others contract you. And from that noticing, you can make decisions not from impulse or resentment, but from wisdom. There's also a gentleness required here. Endings are not always dramatic. Some are quiet shifts, fewer calls, less urgency, a soft fade, and that too can be loving. Not every goodbye needs words. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is step back slowly, with awareness, allowing both hearts to adapt in their own way. But when words are needed, speak them with clarity and compassion, without blame, without rewriting history to make it easier to leave. You don't need to make someone bad to justify moving on. You only need to be honest, and honesty, when paired with kindness, becomes a balm not just for them, but for you. Metta means we remember that every being, even the one who hurt us, wants to be happy. Even the one we leave behind is trying, in their own way. This doesn't mean we excuse harm. It means we stop turning people into enemies in our minds. We release the grip of anger, because anger keeps us bound to what we're trying to leave. In Buddhist practice, compassion is offered equally to the ones we love, to the ones who love us, and to the ones we can no longer walk with. This equal gaze helps soften the sharp edges of separation. It reminds us that endings are not failures, they are transitions, part of the natural rhythm of life. You don't have to understand every reason. You don't have to explain yourself endlessly. You only need to stay rooted in your own integrity, to make decisions from a place of clarity, not reactivity, from presence, not panic, from love, not guilt. This becomes easier as you remember that nothing is truly lost. Connection, once made, leaves a trace. Even if you never speak again, the lessons remain. The shared moments live in memory. And honoring those memories without needing to return to them is part of the healing. The freedom of a compassionate goodbye is not in walking away, it's in how you carry the ending. Whether you walk forward with peace or drag a closed door behind you, whether you allow love to stay soft, even in distance, whether you keep your heart open, even after it breaks. You do not need to become cold to be strong. You do not need to erase someone to move forward. You only need to let the connection evolve or dissolve without war. Sometimes, walking away is the beginning of a deeper love that includes yourself. Love that trusts letting go is not the end of love, but the transformation of it. You leave not because love failed, but because it changed, because it asked for more space than closeness could offer. And in that space, you plant something new, not right away, not as distraction, but eventually a new beginning, shaped by the compassion with which you ended the last. This is the heart of metta in action. It is easy to wish well when things are simple. It is harder and more powerful to wish well when things are ending. To say, "Thank you, I release you. I carry the good, I let go of the pain, and I walk forward, with kindness still intact." This is not forgetting. It is remembering differently. It is choosing not to shrink your heart to match the ending, but to keep it open, alive, free. Because when you walk away with love, you leave room for love to return, perhaps not in the same form, but in a new one that begins not in longing, but in peace. And when you learn to walk away with kindness, when you allow the ending of a connection without closing your heart, a new kind of stillness begins to grow inside you. But in that quiet space, a different voice often starts to speak on that doesn't come from others, but from within. It does not scream, yet it's loud. It does not protect, yet it pretends to. It judges, compares, corrects, and never seems satisfied. This is the voice of the inner critic, the part of you that whispers that you're not enough, not worthy, not doing it right. Even when everything around you is peaceful, even when others speak kindly to you, this voice can turn simple moments into battles. It questions your every move. It makes silence uncomfortable. It interrupts presence with self-doubt. It turns effort into pressure and reflection into shame. This voice often sounds reasonable. It uses the language of self-improvement, pretending it's helping you grow. It says, "You should be better by now," or "Why did you say that?" or "That wasn't good enough." But underneath every statement is the same core message: you are not okay as you are. Buddhism teaches that this voice is not the truth. It's not your wisdom. It's not your intuition. It's a mental habit formed by old conditioning, shaped by fear, reinforced by repetition. And most importantly, it can be released. But not through more judgment, not through fighting it, not through trying to prove it wrong. It softens through awareness, through silence, through letting go. The inner critic thrives on comparison. It feeds on measuring yourself against others or against some imagined version of perfection. It keeps your mind trapped in future anxiety and past regret. But the present moment, when entered, fully has no room for judgment. It simply holds what is, and in that holding, self-worth can begin to return. The practice of equanimity is central here. Equanimity is the quality of balance, of inner steadiness, of not being thrown off by praise or blame. It is what allows you to stay grounded whether someone is lifting you up or tearing you down. But it also applies internally. It helps you meet your own thoughts without letting them define you, especially the harsh ones. When the mind says, "I failed," equanimity answers, "This too is part of the path." When the voice says, "You'll never change," equanimity says, "Growth is not linear." It brings a calm truth that is neither flattery nor attack, just presence, just what's here. This presence is strengthened through meditation, not because meditation makes your thoughts disappear, but because it teaches you to watch them without being pulled in. Over time, you begin to notice the patterns, the tone, the repetition. You begin to hear the voice of the inner critic without believing it, without needing to obey. And the more space you put between awareness and thought, the less control that voice has. It may still speak, but it loses its grip. You stop reacting. You stop collapsing under its weight. You hear it, and you return to breath, to now, to truth. Self-worth in Buddhism is not based on status, achievements, or image. It is rooted in your basic nature, what is sometimes called Buddha nature. This is the part of you that cannot be damaged by failure or enhanced by success. It is already whole, already complete. The inner critic cannot see this nature, but silence can. Silence creates a space where the harsh narrative cannot reach, not because you're avoiding it, but because you're no longer fueling it. In stillness, you begin to feel something deeper than judgment, something softer. A quiet knowing that you are enough, not because you are perfect, but because you are alive, because you are here. This is not about inflating your ego, it's about remembering who you are beneath it. The critic speaks from fear, but awareness speaks from wisdom. And wisdom doesn't shame you, it invites you to see clearly. It shows you where your habits cause pain, not to punish you, but to help you choose differently. There is also great freedom in no longer needing to believe every thought. The inner critic often pretends it is you, but you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices them. And once you truly understand that, the critic begins to lose its power. You also stop looking to others to override that voice. When you let go of the need for external validation, you stop giving your inner critic fuel. You stop making your worth conditional on how others see you. And from that space, your actions become cleaner, more rooted. You do what is meaningful, not what earns praise. The voice of self-judgment also begins to soften when you extend compassion to yourself the way you would to someone you love. Buddhist loving kindness practice teaches us to send goodwill not just to others, but to ourselves, especially when we are struggling, especially when we fall short. Saying, "May I be kind to myself," is not indulgent. It is medicine. It is a way of reclaiming your heart from the constant noise of not enough. It is how you begin to rewrite the way you speak to yourself, not through force, but through care. And sometimes that care means creating boundaries with yourself, choosing not to engage in the same loop of self-criticism, noticing when your thoughts start spiraling into blame or shame, and gently returning your attention to something steady, like your breath, or your body, or the present task. There is a deep humility that comes from letting go of self-attack. You realize that you don't need to be perfect to be present. You don't need to have it all figured out to be worthy of rest, or joy, or forgiveness. You stop performing your value and start embodying it. You also begin to see how much energy has gone into fighting yourself, and what becomes possible when you stop. The creativity that returns, the curiosity, the capacity to connect with others without hiding or pretending, because you're no longer caught in defending your worth, you're living from it. This allows you to show up more fully in your life, not because you feel confident all the time, but because you're no longer paralyzed by the voice that says you're not good enough. You act from care, not fear, from clarity, not pressure. And slowly, your relationship with yourself begins to heal. The inner critic will still visit, but it becomes just one voice in the room, not the loudest, not the one you believe, not the one you obey. And over time, as your awareness grows, that voice speaks less. Or when it does, you meet it with a quiet smile. Not today, not anymore. This is the practice of letting go, not of effort, but of internal violence, of the belief that shame will make you better, that self-punishment is the price of growth. It never was. Growth happens through awareness, through willingness, through presence, not pressure. And in that presence, your self-worth becomes unshakable. Not because you have achieved something new, but because you've let go of the old illusion that you needed to. You stop chasing enoughness. You start resting in it. And from there, everything begins to change. Not because the voice is gone, but because you are no longer listening. You are listening to something else now, something quieter, more real. Something that has waited a long time for you to come home. And once the volume of the inner critic lowers, once your own mind no longer feels like hostile ground, something unexpected begins to reveal itself beneath the quiet, a different kind of exhaustion. Not from striving, not from pain, but from being constantly on, constantly available, constantly responding, constantly expected to show up, perform, explain, connect. Even when your soul whispers for pause, the world encourages more input, more expression, more presence for others. But there's a kind of presence that begins with stepping away, a sacred pause, a conscious withdrawal, not to escape life, but to return to yourself. This is the art of disappearing, not as vanishing, not as erasure, but as a return to source, as stepping back from noise so you can hear what's underneath, as choosing solitude, not as loneliness, but as restoration. In modern life, disappearance is often feared. Being unseen is mistaken for being unimportant. But the wisdom of the Buddhist path reveals something very different. Stepping back is a practice of clarity. Silence is not empty. It is full of noticing. Stillness is not stuck. It is where you begin to move inward. We are constantly encouraged to stay visible, to explain our thoughts, prove our progress, share our experiences, and stay connected at all costs. But always being visible drains something essential. Constant exposure can blur your inner lines. The more you're seen, the easier it becomes to forget who you are when no one is looking. Retreat is not running away, it is remembering. It is sitting still enough to recognize yourself again. There is a reason Buddhist monks enter periods of retreat. It's not because they can't handle the world. It's because they know that wisdom doesn't grow well in noise. Insight needs space. Depth requires time away from performance, not forever. Just long enough to reset your system. Just long enough to hear your own breath without interruption. Withdrawal is misunderstood. People often equate it with weakness, isolation, or coldness. But mindful withdrawal is a conscious act of care. It's knowing when your energy is low, your mind is cluttered, your attention is scattered, and choosing to step out so you can come back whole. Not out of avoidance, but out of love. This practice helps you break the habit of overextending. It teaches you to stop giving more than you have, to stop confusing depletion with devotion. It reminds you that your soul requires privacy sometimes. That your peace is not something you owe to the public. It's something you cultivate internally, in spaces where no one needs anything from you. In the Buddhist tradition, silence is more than the absence of words. It is the space where truth ripens. When you step back from engagement, you begin to notice how much of your speech, thought, and energy is shaped by reaction. You stop filling space out of habit. You begin to discern what actually needs to be said and what was just noise. You also begin to see your own patterns more clearly. How often you reach for your phone when stillness feels uncomfortable. How quickly you agree to things before checking in with your body. How often your presence is scattered between tasks, roles, and identities. Withdrawal reveals these things not to shame you, but to wake you up. This is not a prescription to isolate. It's a reminder to balance, to know when you are slipping into fragmentation, and to catch yourself with grace. To disappear not from love, but for it. So you can return better able to connect. So your giving comes from fullness, not from exhaustion pretending to be care. Even brief moments of retreat can change your internal rhythm. A walk without your phone, an hour with no words, a day without updates. In those spaces, you reset your nervous system. You return your focus inward, where healing and insight have room to surface. This also creates healthier relationships. When you honor your need to step away, you stop resenting the people who need you. You stop expecting others to know when you're overwhelmed. You take responsibility for your own energy. You model what it means to value your own presence. Mindful withdrawal also teaches you how to say no with compassion. Not every call must be answered. Not every request must be fulfilled. Not every message needs a reply right away. Saying no to others is sometimes how you say yes to your own clarity, and you learn that absence, when chosen wisely, is not rejection, it's renewal. There's a spiritual maturity in knowing when to disappear, to retreat before burnout hits, to pause before your words lose meaning, to step back before frustration becomes bitterness. It's not about control. It's about rhythm, the inhale and the exhale of being. Buddhism speaks of renunciation not as a rejection of the world, but as a letting go of what disturbs peace. And sometimes what disturbs peace is overstimulation, overexposure, overconnection. The subtle but constant demand to be outward-facing. Retreat is a way of saying, I will return, but not before I return to myself. This return allows you to recalibrate your values. You begin to see more clearly what matters to you outside of social expectation, outside of pressure. You remember the sound of your own thoughts. You feel what your body has been holding. You realize how much you've been carrying without noticing. And from that place, your engagement becomes more intentional. You speak more honestly. You listen more deeply. You give from sincerity, not obligation. Your presence becomes rooted, not rushed. Mindful disappearance is also a way of resetting your relationship with time. Constant availability distorts your sense of pace. You begin to rush through tasks, through conversations, through emotions. But when you step away from the world's speed, you remember your own. You stop confusing urgency with importance. You slow down enough to feel what's real. Silence becomes a teacher. Stillness becomes a mirror. And in those moments of not needing to respond, you find answers that don't come through thinking, but through resting. This is not about becoming invisible. It's about choosing when and how to be seen. It's about protecting the sacred parts of you that get diluted when always exposed. It's about nurturing your internal space so that when you do return, you return with integrity. You begin to understand that not every absence is a loss. Some are offerings. Offerings to yourself, offerings to clarity, offerings to the parts of you that need space to grow without explanation. And over time, you stop feeling guilty for these pauses. You stop explaining your need for silence. You stop apologizing for protecting your peace. You start trusting that the people meant for you will understand. That your worth isn't tied to your availability. That your presence doesn't have to be constant to be valuable. This creates a deeper intimacy with life, with others, with yourself. Because when you re-enter from silence, you carry something rare. You carry the echo of listening, the residue of calm, the clarity that only comes from being unhooked from performance. You learn to honor not just the need to act, but the need to be still. Not just the need to express, but the need to absorb. You let your mind soften, your senses open, your thoughts settle. And what remains is presence diluted, not distracted, but full. The art of disappearing is not about absence for its own sake. It is about returning in alignment. It is about learning to leave without fear and come back without resentment. To know when your spirit needs quiet, and to honor that without waiting for permission. You don't have to explain your retreat. You don't need to prove your solitude is worthy. You simply listen, and when the silence calls, you follow. Because peace isn't found in endless interaction. It's found in knowing when to step back, when to close the door, when to breathe without performing, when to nourish what no one else can see. This is soul maintenance. This is sacred hygiene. This is not running away. This is walking toward yourself. And there is no deeper return than that. And once you've tasted the nourishment of stepping away, once silence becomes something you no longer fear but welcome, another truth slowly surfaces. The world hasn't stopped spinning. The notifications didn't pause. The expectations, the calendars, the deadlines, they're still there. But you are different now. You can feel the contrast more clearly. How quickly life accelerates. How subtly urgency takes over again. Not always loud, but constant. The pressure to hurry, to keep up, to get ahead. Even in rest, there's a whisper. You should be doing more. This pressure to move fast is not just cultural, it becomes internal. A form of time-based stress that Buddhists understand deeply. It isn't just about being busy, it's about being attached to speed. About believing that fast is always better, that productivity equals value, that time lost is life wasted. And yet, in the effort to rush through everything, something essential is lost: presence, clarity, peace. Chronostress is the suffering created by the illusion that life must move faster for it to be meaningful. It shows up as impatience in traffic, restlessness in meditation, irritation when plans slow down. It keeps your body tense and your mind scattered. But the Buddha taught that the real cause of suffering is not the pace of life. It's the attachment to how fast it should go. Letting go of speed doesn't mean you reject activity. It means you release the belief that rushing brings results, that urgency equals effectiveness. You begin to see that most of the rushing is driven by fear. Fear of missing out, of falling behind, of being seen as unimportant if you're not constantly in motion. Slowness then becomes an act of courage, a willingness to trust that clarity comes not from speed, but from still attention. In Buddhist practice, slowing down is not laziness, it's wisdom. It's choosing to enter each moment fully, without trying to skip ahead. It's walking instead of sprinting, not because you can't go faster, but because you want to feel your steps. To know where you're going, instead of just arriving burned out. This begins with mindfulness. Watching how you relate to time. How often your thoughts are driven by what's next. How rarely you're fully in what's here. When eating, are you tasting? When listening, are you hearing? When sitting, are you actually still, or is the mind already gone? Letting go of speed begins by letting go of this mental habit of escape. The voice that says, "Hurry up and get this over with." That voice turns life into a checklist. It robs depth from even the simplest tasks. Slowness restores that depth not by adding effort, but by subtracting the rush. In Zen, tea is not just consumed. It is prepared, served, and received with presence. This is not because tea itself is holy, but because the act of slowing down reveals the sacredness in simple things. When we're not rushing through them, we can finally see them. When you slow your body, your breath follows. When the breath slows, the nervous system begins to relax. This isn't mystical, it's biological. Urgency activates fight or flight. Slowness invites regulation. Your heart rate settles. Your mind clears. Insight has space to rise. Peace is not hidden, it's just drowned out by speed. Many people confuse ambition with restlessness. They fear that if they slow down, they'll stop progressing. But Buddhist teaching reminds us that speed without awareness leads nowhere. You can be running fast in the wrong direction. Moving slowly, with attention, is not delay its precision. Slowness is also where compassion grows. Rushed people tend to be short with others. They listen poorly, react quickly, judge without space. But when you move slower, you become available. Your attention expands. You see others more clearly. You respond with care, not just efficiency. This shift is not easy in a world that glorifies speed. But it begins with simple choices: walking instead of racing, eating without distractions, speaking without rehearsing your next line, letting your day breathe, creating spaces where nothing needs to happen right away. Slowness also helps with decision-making. When urgency controls you, decisions are made from panic, from the need to resolve discomfort, not from clarity. But when you slow down, you allow wisdom to speak. You begin to distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between noise and truth. This is especially true in relationships. When we rush through conversations, we miss the pauses that reveal emotion. We miss body language. We miss ourselves. Slowness in communication is not inefficiency, it's intimacy. It's the space where understanding lives. The mind often equates stillness with waste. That's the conditioning. But Buddhism teaches the opposite. Stillness is productive in ways speed can never be. It refines perception. It builds presence. It allows life to feel full again, not because you're adding more, but because you're here for what's already happening. Even your creativity benefits. Rushing kills inspiration. It creates pressure to perform, not permission to explore. But slowness invites play. It opens doors you didn't know were there. It allows solutions to arise without force. Some of the best insights don't come from speed, they come from spaciousness. Chronostress is often disguised as responsibility. You say yes to everything, thinking it's noble. But overcommitment is not service, it's scattering. When you slow down, you begin to see where your energy is truly needed. You begin to say no with clarity, yes with heart. Each choice made not from panic, but from peace. Slowness is also the antidote to burnout. Burnout doesn't only come from doing too much, it comes from doing without presence. When your actions outpace your awareness, you become disconnected. But when you bring awareness back into every step, every breath, you begin to recharge from the inside out. This requires trust. Trust that what matters can wait for you to arrive, that life is not a competition, that your worth is not measured in productivity, that time is not something to conquer but to join. Letting go of speed is not a one-time decision, it's a practice. You will be pulled back into urgency, you will feel the pressure. But each time you notice it, you have a choice, to obey the rush or to return to presence. You don't need to abandon your responsibilities. You don't need to move to a monastery. You just need to pause long enough to feel the difference between reacting and responding, between running and arriving, between existing in time and being in it. This kind of presence transforms how you live. You begin to experience life in its fullness again, the texture of the moment, the richness of the ordinary. You are no longer chasing meaning, you are resting in it. You stop measuring your days by how much you got done. You begin to measure them by how deeply you were there for what you did. Not just completion, but connection. Not just action, but attention. Buddhist teachings offer many doorways to this slowness walking meditation, mindful breathing, sitting in stillness. But the deepest teaching is this: you are allowed to go slow. You are allowed to be here. You are allowed to take your time. Time is not your enemy. It's not slipping away from you. It's waiting for you to slow down and return to it, not as something to master, but as something to join, to enter gently, to move with, not against. And when you do, life begins to unfold in a new rhythm, a rhythm that isn't driven by deadlines, but by presence, not by urgency, but by care. A rhythm that says, you don't have to rush to live. You only have to show up, fully, softly, completely, here. And once you begin to release the grip of speed, once you remember how it feels to live without racing the clock, something deeper starts to become visible. Not just how fast you've been moving, but who you've been trying to be while moving. When you let the rush dissolve, you begin to hear the quieter voices underneath, the internal rules, the invisible expectations, the mental checklist of what you should be doing, saying, achieving, and becoming. And suddenly, you realize the pressure never came from time alone. It came from the roles you've been carrying, roles you didn't choose, scripts you inherited, standards you never stopped to question. Buddhist practice invites us to wake up not only from the noise of the world, but from the roles we've unconsciously accepted as our identity. The pressure to be a certain kind of person, the silent fear of what happens if you're not. From early childhood, most people absorb ideas about what makes someone valuable. These ideas come from family, school, culture, media, and over time, they begin to shape how you move through the world without ever asking if they're true. You start believing that to be worthy, you must constantly be useful, that rest must be earned, that failure must be avoided at all costs, that success has to look a certain way, that being good means being agreeable, that love must be proven over and over again. These are not universal truths. They are social scripts, repeated messages written into your nervous system over time. And they are often the hidden source of suffering. One of the most powerful things Buddhist mindfulness reveals is the tension between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be, the tension between your inner truth and your outer performance. When left unexamined, this tension creates chronic anxiety. You may look composed, productive, or even joyful, but inside, you're always trying to keep up with the next should. The word should often sounds logical, but it's rooted in fear. Fear of being judged, rejected, or unseen. It whispers that your value depends on compliance. That peace comes only after proving yourself. that your freedom must be delayed until you've earned it. And yet, the more you obey it, the further away you feel from yourself. Letting go of should is not rebellion, it's remembrance. It's returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. It's beginning to ask different questions, not, what do they expect from me? But what aligns with truth? Not, am I doing it right? But, is this mine to carry? Not, how do I seem? But, how do I feel? Mindfulness helps you hear the voice of should more clearly. You start to notice when a decision is coming from internal pressure instead of inner clarity. You feel the tightness in your body when you're acting to meet someone else's script. You catch yourself saying yes when your whole body means no. And in those moments, you pause. You create space for a different choice. This space is sacred because it's where authenticity returns. The moment you let go of performing, you remember that your value isn't something you perform, it's something you carry. Buddhism doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to see through the illusion of self that has been constructed by habit and expectation. One common script is the belief that happiness comes from being liked, accepted, or validated. So you smile when you're tired. You nod when you disagree. You pretend to be unaffected so others stay comfortable. But underneath the politeness, there is a part of you that starts to fade, the self that longs for honesty, for realness, for the kind of freedom that doesn't come from being liked, but from being seen. Letting go of these scripts takes courage, because they've been with you for years, maybe decades. They shaped your relationships, your career, your sense of safety. But awareness offers a different kind of safety, the kind that doesn't require approval to feel whole. When you stop needing to fit, you start finding where you truly belong. Some scripts are shaped by cultural roles, the silent demands placed on you based on gender, background, family structure. Be strong, be quiet, be obedient, be successful. And if you don't match that role, you feel invisible, or worse, like a failure. But Buddhist teaching reminds us that no role is your essence. Your true nature is not male or female, parent or child, leader or follower. It is awareness. And awareness is free from labels. When you begin to see this, your actions shift. You stop apologizing for changing. You stop waiting for permission to be whole. You stop explaining yourself to people who only understand you through old roles. And you start moving from integrity, not from expectation. Letting go of social scripts is not about avoiding responsibility. It's about aligning your responsibility with truth. You still show up, you still care, but you stop performing identities that drain your spirit. You give yourself permission to be multidimensional, to evolve, to be soft where the world told you to be hard, to be quiet even when noise is expected, to follow your own rhythm without guilt. This doesn't mean you abandon everyone who doesn't understand, but you stop shaping yourself to be understood. You meet others from a grounded place, not shrinking, not performing, just presence. Real presence is not what others want from you, it's what arises when you're no longer trying to be someone for them. This shift often creates friction. When you stop playing roles, people may resist, they may feel confused, or even betrayed. Not because you've done something wrong, but because their comfort was tied to your predictability. But freedom is not about making others comfortable. It's about showing up with honesty and letting others meet you there or not. Buddhist teachings on non-self help you stay steady through this process. When you stop identifying with fixed roles, criticism doesn't feel so personal. Praise doesn't inflate you. Rejection doesn't define you, because your worth is no longer tied to the script. It's rooted in awareness itself. You also begin to relate to others differently. When you let go of your own scripts, you stop projecting expectations onto others. You stop needing them to be a certain way to validate your worldview. You start listening more deeply. You start seeing more clearly, without filters, without assumptions, without trying to fit them into your story. This makes space for real connection. Relationships that are not built on mutual roles, but on shared presence, where both people are free to change, to evolve, to show up differently, where growth is not a threat, but an invitation. Letting go of should also softens your inner world. The voice that says you should be further along, more healed, more successful, it begins to lose power. You start meeting yourself with more patience, more understanding. You stop measuring your path against someone else's timeline. You walk your path, at your pace, in your way. You begin to see that most suffering isn't from who you are, it's from trying to be someone you're not. When you release those expectations, your energy returns, not to impress, not to prove, but to live fully, honestly, freely. This is the wisdom of letting go of social scripts. It's not a rejection of society, it's a return to alignment. A quiet revolution where you no longer sacrifice your truth for temporary acceptance, where your peace is no longer borrowed from performance, where your life is no longer written by someone else's pen. This freedom is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It speaks in how you carry yourself, in how you say no without guilt, in how you say yes with full heart, in how you stay close to what matters, even when the world tells you to be someone else. And in that space, the need to pretend falls away. What remains is presence. What remains is you. And once you begin stepping outside the roles you never agreed to, when you stop living by inherited scripts and start choosing from presence, something else becomes clear. Freedom is not just about what you let go of on the outside. Even after you've stepped away from expectations, from performance, from the pressure to be someone else, there's still a weight that lingers, not on your shoulders, but in your mind. An inner noise that never stops talking, a restless current of thought, planning, replaying, analyzing. Even in silence, it continues. Even in solitude, it speaks. This is mental clutter. And while it's easy to see when your schedule is too full, it takes more awareness to notice when your mind is too crowded to feel peace. Mental clutter doesn't always appear as chaos. Sometimes it hides behind intelligence, behind the need to understand everything, to track every outcome, to manage every detail. But even the most well-organized thoughts can become overwhelming when there's no space between them. Constant thinking turns the mind into a machine that doesn't rest. And the more you identify with it, the harder it becomes to slow down. Buddhism offers a radically simple answer to this problem. You are not your thoughts. And freedom begins when you stop following every one of them. Not by force, not by blocking or suppressing, but by loosening the habit of chasing. When the mind is full of content, there's no room for clarity. When everything feels important, nothing can be felt deeply. Renouncing mental clutter doesn't mean becoming empty of thought. It means becoming empty of unnecessary thought. It means learning to rest the mind instead of constantly using it. This is where Buddhist minimalism of the mind becomes a life-changing practice. It's not just about cleaning out the mind like a drawer. It's about shifting your entire relationship with thinking. In meditation, this begins by noticing how often thoughts arise without your permission. You sit down with the intention to be still, and within seconds, the mind pulls you into a memory, a plan, a worry, a story. None of this is wrong, but it reveals how little control we actually have over thought until we begin to observe it. The more you observe, the more you notice patterns. Some thoughts are repetitive, some are reactive, some are disguises for emotion. You may find yourself replaying conversations, rehearsing future ones, defending yourself to people who aren't even in the room. This is not clarity, it's habit. It's the mind's way of trying to solve what can't be solved through thinking alone. Mental clutter often forms because we confuse thought with responsibility. If we don't think about something constantly, we assume we're being careless. But mindfulness teaches that awareness is not the same as mental effort. You can be deeply present without overthinking. In fact, the more present you are, the less thinking is needed. Letting go of mental clutter begins with becoming more selective. Just like physical minimalism asks, "Do I need this?" The same question can be asked about thought. Is this thought useful? Is it kind? Is it even true? If not, why continue giving it attention? This is not about silencing the mind. The mind will think. That's what it does. But you can stop feeding every thought. You can watch it arise, recognize it as just a mental event, and let it pass. This is the space where peace begins, not in controlling thought, but in not being controlled by it. Another source of mental clutter is internal narration. The constant commentary about everything you're doing. You walk, and your mind says, "I'm walking." You sit, and your mind critiques how you're sitting. You rest, and your mind reminds you of what you're not doing. This background voice creates tension. It fills the space with noise. Buddhist practice helps by training awareness to move from narrative to sensation. Instead of labeling everything, you feel it directly. You shift attention from thinking about the breath to being with the breath, from thinking about your life to living your life. This shift sounds small, but it's profound. It moves you out of your head and into your experience. Mental clutter also grows from emotional avoidance. Many thoughts are not about facts, they are about avoiding feelings. If you're afraid to feel sadness, the mind might create distraction. If you don't want to feel uncertain, the mind might obsess over planning. These patterns create a full mind, but an unprocessed heart, and until the emotion is felt, the mind won't rest. This is why meditation isn't always peaceful at first. As the surface noise settles, you may notice the feelings you've been thinking over. And while that can be uncomfortable, it's also healing. Feeling the feeling frees the thought. You no longer need to circle it in your head because you've actually allowed the body to experience it. Buddhism teaches the importance of seeing clearly. This includes seeing your own mental loops with compassion, not judging the mind for being busy, but noticing what it clings to. Is it clinging to identity, to control, to validation? These attachments feed the endless stream of thought, and seeing them is the first step to letting them go. One helpful practice is noting. When a thought arises, you silently label it, planning, judging, remembering, not to analyze, just to name. This breaks the identification. It reminds you that the thought is a passing event, not a command. And in the space created by that noticing, the thought loses its power. Decluttering the mind also means reducing what you feed it. Constant stimulation, news, notifications, media keeps the mind in high alert. Just as a cluttered room overwhelms the senses, a cluttered mental environment overwhelms the nervous system. Part of mental minimalism is choosing more carefully what enters your awareness. This might mean setting limits on information, creating moments of quiet, protecting your focus, not as escape, but as hygiene. You don't stop brushing your teeth because they'll get dirty again. Mental space requires the same ongoing care. The goal is not to become thoughtless, it's to become discerning. To let thought be a tool, not a dictator. To think when it's helpful and to rest when it's not. The mind, like any tool, dulls when overused. Stillness sharpens it again. Over time, this practice begins to touch every area of life. Your communication becomes more thoughtful. You speak when needed, listen with more presence, and no longer feel the need to fill every silence. Your actions become more intentional. You do what matters, not just what's urgent. You begin to trust that clarity doesn't come from thinking harder, it comes from thinking less and being more. Mental minimalism also creates space for joy. When the mind is not filled with commentary, wonder returns. You notice the breeze, the warmth of your tea, the light in a friend's eyes. These moments were never gone. They were just hidden beneath the weight of too much thinking. As this space opens, your values come into focus. You begin to see what truly matters, what brings peace, what drains you. You make different choices, not because someone told you to, but because your mind is quiet enough to hear your own truth. And when old thoughts return, as they will, you greet them with kindness. You don't fight the clutter. You simply recognize it and release it again and again, not as failure, but as practice. This is the path of inner simplicity, not by force, but by returning, by choosing presence over pressure, awareness over analysis, depth over distraction. It is not dramatic, but it is powerful. Because in a world full of noise, a quiet mind is a revolutionary act. A spacious mind is a compassionate mind, and a compassionate mind is a peaceful life. And once the mind becomes quiet enough to hear itself clearly, once thought no longer clutters the path between awareness and presence, a deeper pattern begins to rise into view. The need to be seen a certain way, the subtle reaching for approval, the quiet fear of judgment. Even in stillness, even in clarity, the desire to be validated can linger like a shadow. You notice how quickly the heart lifts when you're praised and how fast it sinks when you're criticized. It feels personal, it feels real. But underneath both reactions is the same attachment, the craving for identity through others' opinions. Buddhism invites us to look at this honestly. Praise and blame are both temporary conditions. They change, like weather. What pleases someone today may annoy them tomorrow. What earns applause in one space might be ignored in another. If you tie your self-worth to praise, you become dependent on something you cannot control. If you define your peace by avoiding blame, your freedom disappears. Both are forms of bondage, and both keep you locked in reaction, not rooted in truth. This teaching does not mean we stop caring. It means we stop clinging. There's a difference between being open to feedback and being ruled by it. Between hearing others with presence and adjusting your whole self in search of approval. The goal is not to become numbits, to become stable, to respond with clarity, not insecurity. This stability is called equanimity. It is the inner balance that remains steady through gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. Equanimity does not mean indifference. It means you no longer hand your peace over to external voices. You begin to trust that worth doesn't increase with compliments or decrease with criticism. It just is. Unhooking from praise begins by noticing how often you chase it. It may not be obvious. You might think you're simply doing your best. But if your energy spikes with compliments and crashes without them, there's a hook. If your decisions bend to keep others happy, there's a pattern of dependence. These habits are not shameful. They are human, but they can be seen and softened. The same goes for blame. When someone criticizes you, does it destroy your calm? Do you defend yourself before even understanding what was said? Do you take it as confirmation of an old belief, that you're not enough, not lovable, not safe? The mind attaches not only to praise, but to insult. Because both reinforce identity, one by lifting it, the other by attacking it. But identity itself is fluid, and when you stop building your life around defending or enhancing it, peace has space to enter. In meditation, these patterns reveal themselves clearly. You sit, and thoughts arise, memories of being praised, echoes of being blamed, regret, longing. You feel the pull to fix your image, to correct the past, to win someone back. But each time you observe without reacting, you cut the cord a little more. You become free not from feeling, but from being ruled by it. This freedom is not passive, it's powerful. Because when you're no longer seeking constant affirmation, your energy returns to what truly matters. You create not to be admired, but because it aligns with your values. You speak not to be right, but to be real. You work not to impress, but to serve. And when applause comes, you accept it with humility. When it doesn't, you stay centered. Letting go of this attachment also changes how you give feedback. When you no longer live on validation, you stop weaponizing it. You don't use praise to control. You don't use blame to punish. You communicate from presence, not manipulation. And you can receive feedback the same way, with openness, but without collapse. There is deep wisdom in remembering that others' opinions are based on their perspective, not on absolute truth. What someone sees in you is filtered through their own conditioning. Their praise might reflect their preferences, not your essence. Their blame might reflect their fears, not your failures. When you truly understand this, you stop shrinking or swelling based on their words. You simply listen, you discern, and you decide what's worth holding. This doesn't mean becoming isolated or rigid. It means standing on solid ground. It means being available for growth without losing your shape. You can say, "Thank you," when someone admires you, and not cling to it. You can say, "I hear you," when someone disagrees and not crumble. This practice requires honesty. Do you exaggerate stories to be admired? Do you hide parts of yourself to avoid criticism? These moments are not signs of weakness. They are opportunities. Every time you choose truth over performance, you reclaim energy. Every time you stay soft in the face of blame, you deepen equanimity. Equanimity is often misunderstood as detachment. But it's not cold. It's deeply warm. It allows you to love without trying to possess, to care without needing control, to show up fully and then release the outcome. This is not indifference, it's freedom with presence. This freedom also means you can fail without shame. You stop needing to hide mistakes. You stop fearing imperfection, because your worth is no longer on trial. You're not living to impress a jury that's constantly changing its verdict. You're living from the inside out. This shift brings peace, but it also brings creativity. When you're no longer editing yourself for applause, you begin to speak more honestly, act more boldly, create more authentically. You take risks not for approval, but because your soul is asking for expression. And that kind of creativity is magnetic, because it's not trying to be liked, it's trying to be true. Letting go of praise and blame also softens conflict. When you're not attached to being right, you can actually listen. When you're not afraid of being wrong, you can learn. The ego stops needing to win, and space opens for connection. Arguments lose their charge, defenses dissolve. Because you're not guarding a fragile identity, you're standing in quiet confidence. This practice is not about never feeling hurt or pleased. Those emotions will still arise, but you watch them without gripping them. You don't build your life around them. You don't let them steer your choices. You allow praise to come and go. You allow blame to come and go. And in the space that remains, you discover something steady. A self that doesn't rise and fall with opinion. A peace that doesn't need to be proven. This is why monastics in the Buddhist tradition often live with simplicity. Not to escape the world, but to remove distractions that keep them tethered to image. In simplicity, the mind reveals its attachments. And once seen, they can be released, not all at once, but breath by breath. You don't need to retreat from society to practice this. You simply need to notice where your identity is hooked and begin to unhook it, slowly, gently, with compassion. This is not about building a stronger ego. It's about no longer needing ego to protect you. The truth is, you already exist beyond praise and blame. Long before anyone applauded you, long before anyone criticized you, you were whole. And that wholeness is not fragile, it is not at risk. It doesn't require defense. It only requires remembering. So, you continue the practice. You notice the need to be admired and let it pass. You feel the sting of criticism and let it pass. You rest in awareness where neither defines you. And in that resting, you become more available for life, not as a performance, but as presence. A presence that cannot be shaken by someone's approval. A presence that does not shrink under someone's disapproval. A presence that is free because it no longer waits to be validated. It just is, and that is enough. And once you stop measuring yourself through the shifting mirror of praise and blame, something else becomes possible. You no longer react to approval with pride or to criticism with collapse. You begin to taste the quiet stability that comes from within. But in daily life, this balance is tested constantly, not just through words, but through moments. Through the heat of frustration, the sting of offense, the pull of fear. Even when you know you are not defined by opinion, the body still reacts, the voice still rises, the emotion still floods in. And this is where the deeper training begins, not just in letting go of praise or blame, but in letting go of the urge to react. The ability to pause in a moment of emotional intensity is one of the greatest forms of inner strength. It creates space between stimulus and response. It allows you to witness what's happening before acting on it. This space is not weakness, it is power. It is the exact opposite of repression. In Buddhism, this pause is a doorway to freedom. It stops the chain reaction that turns discomfort into destruction. It allows emotion to arise without being turned into fuel for harm. Most people believe emotions are problems when they are actually signals. Anger, sadness, fear, they are not mistakes. They are messengers. But if we react too quickly, we miss their message. And instead of responding, we fall into reflex. We say what we didn't mean. We do what we later regret. We tighten, we push, we defend. The event may pass, but the ripple continues. Non-reaction does not mean suppression. It means awareness without being pulled. It means feeling the heat of anger and choosing not to let it speak through your mouth. It means noticing the sharp edge of defensiveness and letting it dissolve in silence. Not because you're avoiding conflict, but because you're seeing clearly. Because you understand that reaction without wisdom deepens suffering for yourself and for others. This understanding begins in the body. Every emotional reaction is not just a thought, it's a full-body event. The stomach tightens, the breath shortens, the shoulders lift, the eyes narrow. And often, before the mind has even registered what's happening, the body is already in defense mode. When you practice mindfulness, you begin to notice these shifts in real time. You feel the first signs of emotional activation, and in that awareness, you reclaim your choice. This choice is not obvious at first. It takes practice to recognize the gap, to feel the pull of reaction and stay still, to let the wave of anger pass through without acting it out. But with time, this becomes second nature. You begin to trust that not every feeling needs to be spoken, not every trigger needs a response, not every discomfort is a demand. In Buddhist teachings, this quality is closely related to equanimity, but it also carries the flavor of what is called upekkati, ability to remain balanced, even in the presence of strong emotion. Not because you are cold, but because you are awake. You feel everything, but you are not swept away. This ability changes relationships profoundly. When you no longer react immediately, communication deepens. You stop interrupting. You stop defending yourself before understanding. You start listening not just with your ears, but with your presence. You begin to see that most arguments are not about truth, they are about reactivity. about pain protecting itself. And when you're not adding fuel to that fire, you help both people come back to clarity. There is humility in non-reaction. It's the humility of knowing that your first impulse is not always your wisest, that your emotions, though valid, may not be the best guide in that moment. This is not self-doubt, this is maturity, the strength to pause, to breathe, to choose. Even in solitude, the practice continues. The mind reacts to memories, to imagined scenarios. You replay moments, argue with people in your head, defend your past actions. This too is reaction, and here too the pause matters. When you notice that internal drama beginning, you can step back. You can observe the mental movie without jumping into the screen. You can remember, this is just a thought. This is just a sensation. It will pass. The power of non-reaction is not in stopping feeling. It's in allowing the feeling to rise and fall without interference. The mind may label, the body may tighten, but your awareness remains steady. That steadiness is the ground of freedom. It's the place where all actions begin to carry intention instead of impulse. This changes your sense of time. When you're not reacting, life slows down. You have more space to consider, to reflect, to align. Decisions become clearer. Regret becomes rarer. Because you're no longer rushing to fix discomfort, you're learning to sit with it, to understand it, and to let it move through without owning it. This kind of training also brings healing. When you stop reacting to pain with more pain, the cycle begins to break. The old stories don't get repeated. The old wounds stop being reopened. You stop adding layers of conflict to your own suffering. You begin to treat yourself with the same presence you offer others. In the Buddhist path, this is not a side effect. It is the essence of liberation. Reactivity is a chain, a conditioned loop, a pattern. And each time you choose to pause instead of follow that loop, you loosen one more link. You don't have to fix the entire chain all at once. You only need to see it, one moment at a time. This practice builds trust in yourself, because you start to realize that you can be with strong emotion without being overwhelmed. You learn that your peace is not fragile, that your stillness is not passive, that in the moment where others expect reaction, your restraint becomes a form of wisdom. There is also deep compassion in non-reaction. When someone attacks you and you don't return it, you hold space for something different to emerge. You offer the world a different rhythm that says, we don't have to be ruled by the heat of the moment. One that says we can feel without lashing out. One that teaches others, silently, through example. You also begin to forgive more easily, not because what happened was okay, but because you're no longer reacting to the pain. You're witnessing it, and through that witnessing, you stop needing revenge. You stop needing to punish. You just see the suffering and choose not to add to it. None of this makes emotion go away, but it makes you stronger than your habits, stronger than your conditioning. You carry the same capacity for feeling, but now you hold it with care, with breath, with intention. And this intention becomes a form of love. Love for the people in your life, who no longer have to walk on eggshells. Love for yourself, who no longer has to live with the regret of words spoken in heat. Love for the present moment, which you no longer reject by trying to fix it too quickly. Reaction is a kind of running. From discomfort, from fear, from feeling powerless. But the moment you pause, you stop running. You stand in presence. And presence is power. Not the power to control others, but the power to meet life as it is, with clarity and calm. So the practice continues. You notice the heat rise. You feel the urge to respond. And instead, you breathe, you watch, you stay. You remember that this too will pass. And it does. It always does. In that passing, you find your footing. You reclaim your center. And with every moment you choose presence over reaction, you deepen your freedom not as an idea, but as lived truth. One breath, one pause, one release at a time. And once you've learned to pause before reacting, once you've seen how stillness dissolves the heat of impulse and leaves space for understanding, another layer begins to unfold. You realize that letting go is not just a tool for emotional regulation. It's not only about calming your nervous system or avoiding conflict. There's something deeper happening when you release. Something that moves beyond technique, beyond control. A kind of offering, a silent act of reverence. Because what you let go of with presence, you don't lose, you give back. You surrender not as defeat, but as devotion. Letting go, when seen through this lens, becomes sacred. In many Buddhist teachings, renunciation is misunderstood. People assume it means rejecting life, withdrawing from joy, cutting off love. But true renunciation is not cold detachment. It's the opposite. It's the willingness to stop clinging to what you love so that love can move freely. It's releasing not because you don't care, but because you care too much to hold it tightly. Letting go as devotion means you no longer see release as sacrifice. You see it as alignment. You begin to understand that attachment limits love, even when it's born from love. When you hold someone or something too tightly, fear enters the space. Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of impermanence. And fear distorts the purity of connection. What you grasp becomes fragile. What you obsess over becomes heavy. But when you release with intention, with care, the weight lifts, the space opens, the connection breathes. This is not easy. Letting go with devotion requires trust. Trust that what is real will not be lost. Trust that you don't have to control every outcome for beauty to remain. Trust that you are not diminished by what you release. That your peace is not dependent on keeping, but on flowing. In this light, detachment becomes intimacy. Not a shutting down, but a deeper opening. You are no longer clinging to the surface. You're connected to the essence. You're not just in love with form, you're in love with truth. This devotion doesn't require a monastery or vows. It happens in the quiet decisions of daily life, when you choose to let someone go without resentment, when you let a season of life close without clinging, when you hold your desires without gripping them, when you let your plans change without losing your balance. Each of these moments becomes a ritual, not because they are big, but because they are honest. Letting go as devotion also means that you begin to honor what has already been. You stop needing more to validate what you had. You stop demanding permanence to prove meaning. The relationship that ended, the dream that shifted, the version of you that no longer fits all of it is still sacred. You let it return to the earth not because it failed, but because it was complete. This kind of letting go is full of love, not emotion, but love as clarity, as the willingness to allow reality to be what it is, not what you wish it would be. This is not indifference. It is the purest form of engagement. You're no longer trying to shape life into your idea of it. You're bowing to life as it reveals itself. In practice, this may look simple. You feel an urge to control, and you soften. You feel the temptation to hold someone too tightly, and you loosen your grip. You notice your attachment to an outcome, and you release it into the present moment, not because it doesn't matter, but because your peace matters more. You stop trying to force closure. You stop trying to perfect the story. You stop waiting for guarantees before allowing yourself to rest. Letting go becomes a daily prayer. May I meet this moment without clinging. May I trust what is unfolding, even if I don't understand it. May I release what's not mine to carry with grace. And slowly, something inside begins to shift. You're no longer pushing against the current. You're flowing with it. not in passivity but in participation. You are present, aware, responsive, but no longer afraid, no longer ruled by the need to secure everything. This changes your relationship with people. You start to love without trying to possess. You offer your presence without trying to control what it gives you in return. You become more generous, not because you have less need, but because your need is no longer desperate. You are grounded in something deeper than having. You are grounded in being. You also stop measuring the value of something by how long it lasts. You begin to feel the richness of impermanence. A conversation, a touch, a glance, all of it matters, even if it never happens again. You stop needing to stretch moments to prove their worth. You just meet them fully and then let them go. This opens your heart in a way that nothing else can. When you love without attachment, you feel more deeply, not less, because you're not distracted by fear. You're not calculating, not preparing for loss, not bracing. You're present, and presence is the highest form of love. Even with yourself, letting go becomes sacred. You stop clinging to who you think you should be. You let go of the pressure to always be improving. You stop gripping past versions of yourself. You allow growth to happen naturally, not as a project, but as a response to life. You stop performing for your own approval. You begin to trust that who you are in this moment is enough. Letting go as devotion is also a response to suffering. When pain comes, you hold it with kindness, but you don't become it. You let it pass without building a new identity around it. You release not to forget, but to make room. You create space for healing by not attaching to the wound. This is not denial, it is mercy. This path invites humility. You start to see how much energy went into controlling, fixing, forcing, and you start to understand that most of life doesn't need your interference, it needs your attention. The flower doesn't bloom because you tug on it. It blooms because you stop disrupting its natural rhythm. So too with healing, with love, with peace. You stop chasing meaning and start meeting life. You understand that letting go doesn't end connection, it makes space for a truer one. The bond that remains when clinging ends is rooted in trust, not fear, in openness, not grasping. This becomes a way of living, a soft exhale in your chest, a loosening in your fists, a quiet voice inside that says, I don't need to hold everything to be whole. And even when loss hurts, even when change is sharp, this practice holds you, because you're no longer trying to fight the tide, you're bowing to it. You're offering your expectations, your attachments, your control back to the flow that brought them to you in the first place. Letting go as devotion is the recognition that everything is borrowed, that love, time, health, connection, all of it is a gift, and none of it can be hoarded. So you hold it gently, with gratitude, and when it's time to release, you do so with reverence. You stop demanding guarantees. You start living from wonder. You begin to see that surrender is not giving up, it's giving in to something larger, something wiser, something kinder than control. And with every release, you return. Not to emptiness, but to space, not to loss, but to truth. You become less afraid of endings, less obsessed with beginnings, more at home in what is. This is the sacredness of letting go, not a loss of power but the rediscovery of it, not absence but depth, not giving up but giving everything the chance to breathe, including yourself. And in that breath, something opens, something soft, something still, something free. And as you learn to release your grasp, not as rejection but as reverence, as love rather than loss, a subtler truth begins to rise. Even when your hands have let go, your mind may still be gripping. Not out of possession now, but out of habit. The constant need to fix, to figure it out, to improve, to heal fast, feel better, get over it. There's still a voice that insists something is wrong and that it must be solved. That peace lies just beyond the next breakthrough, the next strategy, the next solution. But what if the problem is not what's broken, but the belief that everything must be fixed? The fixing mind is clever. It uses the language of care. It wears the mask of wisdom. It wants relief, progress, answers. It convinces you that every uncomfortable emotion, every wave of uncertainty is a threat, that it must be labeled, diagnosed, worked through, or eliminated. But this constant problem-solving keeps you circling. It leaves no room for stillness, no space to simply be with what is. Buddhist wisdom invites a different approach that doesn't begin with fixing, but with witnessing. Not action, but attention. It's a radical shift, healing not through more effort, but through surrender, through allowing what arises to have space, without the compulsion to edit it. When you're always trying to fix yourself, you begin to believe you're fundamentally broken. Your identity becomes entangled with your struggles. You see discomfort as evidence of failure. You use spiritual practice not to wake up, but to manage yourself like a project. But true healing isn't something you do to yourself. It's something you allow. It happens in the pauses, in the softening, in the release of the inner war against the moment. This doesn't mean you give up on growth. It means you stop trying to force it. Growth, when real, is organic. It unfolds naturally when you stop interfering. A wound does not need to be told how to close. The body already knows. The mind, when given stillness, also knows how to settle. What gets in the way is the habit of trying to rush, tweak, push, improve. The fixing mind is often uncomfortable with silence. It fills the space quickly. If sadness arises, it analyzes. If restlessness appears, it strategizes. It asks, why is this happening? What does this mean? How do I get out of this? But these questions are based in resistance. They say, this shouldn't be here. They place distance between you and your experience. But surrender says, this is here. Let me feel it. In meditation, this shift becomes clear. When you sit and simply watch the breath, the fixing mind becomes loud. It says, you're doing it wrong, that you should be calmer, that this posture isn't helping. But if you keep sitting and keep watching, the mind starts to slow down, not because you fixed it, but because you stopped feeding it. Allowing does not mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stop interrupting. You give the nervous system space to regulate itself. You give the emotions room to speak in their own language. You stop translating everything into problems. You start trusting that discomfort has its own rhythm, its own intelligence. This shift requires humility. The fixing mind wants control. It wants clear outcomes, guarantees, checklists. But surrender asks for something deeper, trust without evidence. It's the trust that healing is happening even when you can't see it. That transformation doesn't need to be tracked. That wisdom is not always loud or linear. You begin to feel the difference in your body. Fixing creates tension. Surrender releases it. You notice that when you stop needing the moment to be different, your breath softens, your jaw loosens, your thoughts slow. You begin to inhabit the moment fully, not because it's perfect, but because you've stopped demanding it be different. This practice is especially powerful in emotional pain. When grief comes, the fixing mind wants a plan. When anxiety spikes, it wants a solution. But emotion is not a math problem. It's not meant to be solved. It's meant to be held, witnessed, felt. When you stop trying to push it away, it often begins to shift on its own. That's the paradox. You heal faster when you stop trying to heal. Not because you don't care, but because the mind finally stops creating friction. When you allow your pain to simply exist, without labeling it as wrong, you stop doubling the suffering. You don't stack judgment on top of discomfort. You stop adding the story that says this should not be happening. This also changes how you relate to others. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you stop trying to fix everyone around you. You listen more. You advise less. You stop seeing others' emotions as problems to be solved. You hold space instead of offering solutions. And often, that's exactly what they need. Letting go of the fixing mind allows you to meet life directly, without needing to manipulate it, without constantly interpreting. You no longer need to decode every experience. You let it arrive and pass, without needing to assign meaning or craft a lesson. You trust that meaning will arise in its own time. You also stop performing your healing. You no longer need to prove how self-aware you are. You're not measuring your worth by how calm or balanced you appear. You stop using the language of spirituality to hide from raw emotion. You become honest. You show up messy if that's what's real, and that authenticity becomes your strength. This shift is subtle but powerful. You begin to see how much of your energy was going toward internal management, toward trying to be okay. But when you let go of the need to be okay, you realize you already are. Not in some finished, perfect sense, but in the deepest way that matters. Your being itself is not broken. It never was. What needed healing was your belief that you had to earn peace. This insight opens a door to a different way of living. You begin to trust the intelligence of presence. You let life unfold. You don't force clarity. You rest in not knowing. And from that space, deeper answers begin to rise. Not from thought, but from stillness. Not from effort, but from being. Letting go of the fixing mind also dissolves inner pressure. The pressure to constantly improve, to chase some future version of yourself. You stop postponing your worth. You begin to live now, not waiting to deserve peace, not waiting to get everything in order, but claiming your seat at the table of life as you are. This doesn't mean you avoid responsibility. It means you stop approaching life like a machine to be optimized. You begin to treat yourself like a garden. You tend, you water, you allow light and shadow. You don't yell at the soil when it needs time. You simply stay close and trust the process. Even in moments of confusion, surrender helps. When you don't know what to do, fixing rushes in with plans. But sometimes, what's needed is not a plan but presence. To feel your feet on the ground, to hear your breath, to stay with the unknown without forcing it into shape. This teaches patience, not waiting passively, but standing with the moment long enough for it to reveal itself, letting life come into focus without rushing it. Trusting that things unfold at their own pace when you stop interrupting with solutions. The more you practice this, the more intuitive life becomes. You make choices not from fear or control, but from alignment. You listen more deeply. You act more clearly. You respond with calm, even when life feels uncertain. And slowly, you realize something profound. You don't need to fix yourself to love yourself. You don't need to have all the answers to live fully. You don't need to manage every emotion to be at peace. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to simply be. This is not passivity, it's wisdom. A wisdom that trusts being more than doing, that values stillness as much as strategy, that sees surrender not as giving up, but as giving over to truth, to presence, to the deeper intelligence of life itself. And in that giving over, something opens, something kind, something strong, something real. You let go, and life begins to hold you. And as you begin releasing the endless cycle of self-repair, as the grip of needing to be fixed begins to soften, a quieter question arises: what happens now? If there's nothing to fix, nothing to chase, no future version of yourself that holds all the answers, what remains? This moment does, and yet for most, peace still feels distant, a horizon they can never reach. It's not that people don't want to feel peace, it's that they've been taught it only lives in the future, after healing, after success, after becoming. But the truth is simpler, more immediate, and far more radical. Peace is not later, it is now, and the future is the illusion that keeps us from entering it. In Buddhist teaching, the concept of nirvana is not a reward waiting at the end of some distant path. It is not a prize for years of perfect discipline. It is a state of freedom that lives within the present moment. The only thing keeping it hidden is our mind's fixation on what's next. The moment we turn toward now with full attention, the doorway begins to open. Most people live as if life will begin later. They hold peace hostage to future conditions. When the job stabilizes, when the relationship works, when the body heals, when the confusion clears. But these conditions are endless, and when one is met, another takes its place. The mind is clever in this way. It always pushes peace one step further, and so you never arrive. To dismantle this pattern, the first step is seeing it, noticing how often your thoughts are elsewhere. How often your attention leaves the present, not because the present is lacking, but because your mind has been trained to seek, to plan, to prepare. You catch yourself running mental rehearsals, making lists, imagining conversations that haven't happened yet. It all seems useful, but what it really does is remove you from life. This constant projection into the future creates a subtle form of anxiety. Even moments of rest are filled with thoughts of what's next. Even joy becomes tinged with the pressure to hold on to it. But when you truly see this, not as failure but as habit, you begin to reclaim your attention. Mindfulness is the practice of noticing when you've left the present and returning without judgment, not to perfect presence, but to remember where life actually happens. Right here, not 5 minutes from now, not tomorrow, not when you figure everything out, but now, in its fullness. This moment may be simple. It may not feel extraordinary, but it contains everything: sensation, sound, breath, warmth, emotion. The future contains only thoughts. This moment contains reality. The shift happens when you stop seeing the future as better than now, when you stop chasing a different version of the present, when you realize that now is not a means to something else, it is the whole path. This doesn't mean you abandon all plans. It means you stop giving them your life force. You make space for intention, but you don't sacrifice presence to feed it. You stop postponing your peace. You realize that peace delayed is peace denied. Liberation from the future is not passive. It requires vigilance. You must catch the subtle ways the mind sneaks forward, not just in worry, but in hope. Hope can be beautiful, but it can also become a trap, a way of believing that something better is coming, and what's here is never enough. When hope becomes a waiting room, you forget how to live. But when you release the need for something different, you begin to engage fully. You drink your tea. You look into someone's eyes. You feel your heartbeat, not as a stepping stone, but as life itself. This changes how you heal. You stop waiting to be whole. You let your healing include the mess. You let your joy include the tears. You stop needing to be finished to be present. You live as someone who no longer measures their worth by how far along they are. Letting go of the future also softens how you carry pain. When you stop trying to escape it by rushing into the next moment, it becomes more bearable. Pain is sharpest when resisted, but when met with full presence, it often reveals layers of insight, softness, and truth that cannot be accessed through escape. This is what nirvana means. It is not a distant paradise. It is the cooling of the fire of craving, of becoming, of needing the next thing to be okay. Nirvana is when that fire goes out, not because you extinguished all desire, but because you stopped feeding it with your attention. And what remains is stillness, not the absence of movement, but the presence of peace, not perfection, but a deep acceptance that what is here, as it is, can be enough. This also transforms how you relate to time. You no longer use it as a tool to measure your success or compare your life to others. You begin to see that clocks and calendars are practical, but they do not define reality. Reality is not measured in years. It is felt in moments, in breath, in awareness. The more you practice this, the more you notice the richness of now. Not because it's always pleasant, but because it's always real. The now includes every texture of being light and shadow, ease and difficulty. And the freedom comes not from fixing these textures, but from staying with them without turning them into stories. You begin to understand that the mind creates future not just in time, but in identity. It projects who you'll be, what you'll feel, how others will see you. But identity, like time, is a mental construct. Who you are is not a fixed story marching toward some future conclusion. Who you are is the awareness that notices all of it, that watches the projections without getting caught in them. This opens a sense of relief. You stop needing to track your progress. You let go of being a project. You start to feel the freedom of just being a person, alive, awake, present. This presence becomes your home. It travels with you. You carry it into your relationships, your work, your solitude. It becomes the way you meet life, not with anticipation, but with attention. Not with hope for later, but with reverence for now. And yes, you will forget, you will drift. The mind will pull you forward again, but each time you notice and return, you strengthen the muscle of presence. You return not with shame, but with gratitude, because this moment always welcomes you back. Living this way doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes real, and real life, lived fully, is enough. You stop chasing peak experiences. You stop needing spiritual fireworks. You begin to see the sacred in what's ordinary, in a breath, in a pause, in the fact that you're here at all. This is not the absence of dreaming. It's the freedom from being ruled by what hasn't happened yet. You can still dream. You can still plant seeds. But your heart is no longer hostage to what those seeds may or may not become. You begin to meet the unknown with less fear, because your peace is no longer tied to certainty. You let life surprise you. You walk forward not to arrive, but to walk. This is the quiet joy of now. It asks for nothing, it promises nothing, but it gives everything. It is the freedom that doesn't need to be earned, the presence that doesn't need to be prepared for. And when you live this way, you begin to understand. You were never waiting for peace. Peace was waiting for you, right here, always, now. And once you've stopped chasing what hasn't happened, once you realize that peace is not postponed but already present, you begin to see how your presence affects more than just you. It softens your words. It quiets the tension in your body. It gives people around you permission to breathe more freely. And something even deeper becomes clear. Letting go is not only a gift to yourself, it is a gift to others. It is generosity in its purest form, because when you release control, expectation, and ownership, you stop holding others hostage to your attachments. You give them room to be, to change, to grow without carrying the weight of your need. Letting go is often seen as a solitary practice, a personal decision to free your mind, to make peace with impermanence, to stop clinging to outcomes. But the truth is, every release ripples outward. Every time you let go of your grip on how someone else should behave, feel, or respond, you create space for real connection. When you no longer demand they meet your image of them, they can finally show up as themselves. That is a rare form of compassion. Non-attachment does not mean emotional disconnection. It means refusing to burden others with your fears and desires disguised as love. When love is entangled with control, it becomes heavy. It becomes fragile. But when you offer it with an open hand instead of a closed fist, it becomes healing. It becomes trust. In Buddhist teaching, generosity is not limited to material things. True generosity includes patience, understanding, and freedom. And one of the most powerful offerings you can give is the release of your own expectations. Expectations that were never someone else's responsibility to carry. This is especially true in close relationships. Whether with family, friends, or partners, we often unconsciously tie our sense of peace to their behavior. We believe that their choices must match our hopes, that their emotions must mirror our needs. But this creates invisible contracts they never agreed to, and the moment they begin to change or drift from the image we hold, we suffer, not because of them, but because of our grip. Letting go here means acknowledging that other people are not extensions of your mind, that their path is their own, that their choices do not need to confirm your comfort. When you stop needing others to fulfill your idea of who they should be, you begin to love more cleanly, more freely. You support instead of supervise. You listen instead of correct. You witness instead of manage. This form of letting go is often mistaken for distance. But in truth, it brings you closer. Because the pressure is gone, the expectation is gone. What remains is real presence, not performance. When someone senses that they are accepted without conditions, something deep inside them softens. They trust you, not because you agree with everything they do, but because they feel safe to be who they are. That is the generosity of non-attachment. It also frees you, because holding on to who someone used to be, whether out of nostalgia or fear, traps both of you in the past. When you let go, you let the relationship evolve. You stop grieving who they were, and you start meeting who they are now, without the burden of needing it to feel the same. Even with those who have hurt you, letting go becomes a gift. Not to excuse the harm, but to release the story. To stop carrying resentment that poisons your own peace. You don't forgive because they deserve it, you forgive because you do, because you deserve to be free from what happened. That freedom, extended inward and outward, is generosity. It breaks cycles of blame and bitterness. It plants the seed for something more spacious to grow. This form of generosity also appears in how we let people leave. When someone exits your life by choice, by change, or by circumstance, it is natural to grieve. But it is also generous to release them without resistance, to bless their path, to wish them peace even in their absence. That kind of parting carries dignity. It honors what was without grasping for what no longer is. Letting go also shows up in how we listen. When we release our need to be right, to win, to defend, we become better listeners. We don't rush to reply. We don't prepare counter-arguments while they speak. We make space, and in that space, people feel seen, respected, heard. That is generosity, not just of attention, but of ego. The same is true in community. When we stop needing to control how others grow, we support growth more powerfully. We allow space for diversity in thought, expression, and rhythm. We stop projecting our spiritual path onto everyone else's. We trust that each person's unfolding is unique, and we let go of the urge to direct it. Non-attachment also transforms leadership. A generous leader is one who serves, not one who controls. When you lead without clinging to how others receive you, your leadership becomes lighter, more impactful. People follow not because they fear your reaction, but because they feel your sincerity. They feel your trust in them. That kind of trust is a rare and radical gift. Even parenting shifts through this lens. Children sense the difference between guidance and control. When you let go of needing them to validate your worth or follow your script, They become more honest. They begin to trust their own intuition. You offer wisdom without ownership, support without suffocation, and the relationship becomes rooted in mutual respect, not fear. This generosity is not loud. It's not praised in public, but it creates deep safety, the kind of safety that allows people to grow without having to break free first. The kind of space that lets connections stay alive because it's not tied down. Letting go in this way also requires inner strength, because it means learning to sit with the discomfort of not knowing what someone will choose, not knowing how they will change, and still loving them. Still staying open, still being kind. That openness, even in uncertainty, is the truest form of compassion. It is easy to love someone who fits your hopes. It is harder and more generous to love them as they are, not in resignation, but in reverence, in trust that love does not need to control to be real. That letting someone be themselves is not detachment, it is the deepest respect. Letting go also means releasing people from your past, not only those who left, but those who remain in your memory as pain, the stories you keep telling, the versions of them you keep fighting in your mind. When you finally let that version dissolve, you make space, not always for reconnection, but for release, for silence where there was once tension, for peace where there was once inner argument. Even strangers benefit from this practice. When you let go of judgment, assumption, comparison, you meet people with fewer filters. You begin to see them not through stories, but through presence. You allow them to be complex, to be more than their labels, to be human. This is where non-attachment becomes radical, because it stops being about spiritual refinement and becomes about real-world kindness, about freeing others from your emotional demands, about recognizing how often our pain comes from expecting others to meet our unspoken needs. Generosity of letting go is about choosing to no longer hold people responsible for your inner weather, choosing to no longer punish them with your silence, your sarcasm, your withdrawal, choosing to communicate from love, not leverage, to give space, not as a punishment, but as a gift. It also means letting go of fixing others, of believing you know what's best. Even when someone is struggling, your control won't heal them, your judgment won't make them wise. Sometimes your presence, your belief in their ability to find their own way, is the most powerful thing you can offer. Letting go is also generous toward yourself. When you stop holding on to regret, onto shame, onto endless self-review, you give yourself the chance to begin again. You stop holding your own growth hostage to perfection. You become more patient, more forgiving, more willing to meet yourself where you are. You also let go of the idea that your worth must be proven through how well others respond to you. Their approval is not your value. Their rejection is not your failure. You give yourself the space to breathe, to change, to try again. That, too, is a gift. Ultimately, non-attachment is not just self-liberation. It is a practice of deep relational freedom. It invites everyone to move more gently. It removes the need to control and replaces it with the willingness to witness. It removes the need to grip and replaces it with the courage to trust. And through that trust, relationships soften, communication opens, presence deepens. Not because everyone does what you hoped, but because you've learned to love without needing them to. This is the generosity of letting go. It asks for nothing, and in return, it gives everything. And once you've felt the quiet power of releasing others from your grip, once you've witnessed how letting go becomes an offering, not a loss, there's a deeper truth waiting beneath all the words and actions. It's not in what you say, or even what you do. It doesn't live in ideas, theories, or explanations. It reveals itself when there's nothing left to prove, no one left to convince. Just a calm, grounded sense of knowing that doesn't need to be named. This is the wisdom that lives beyond language, a kind of truth that only silence can hold. We spend much of our time in the realm of thought, labeling, interpreting, categorizing. The mind searches constantly for the right concept, the right understanding. But even the most brilliant thought is still a step removed from presence. Even the clearest insight is still a layer between you and what's real. Buddhism teaches that true wisdom is not in collecting more knowledge, it's in seeing directly, without overlay, without narration. Silent knowing is the kind of awareness that doesn't need commentary. It is felt in the body, not built in the mind. It's the calm clarity you feel when you're no longer asking questions, not because they've all been answered, but because they no longer matter. It's what's left when the mental noise fades and there's nothing but this moment, just as it is. This doesn't mean thoughts are bad, but thoughts can only take you so far. They point toward experience, but they are not the experience. They describe the moon, but they are not the light. At a certain point in practice, you begin to sense this difference. You see how grasping for mental clarity creates more confusion. You realize that the mind trying to explain everything is the very thing standing in the way of understanding. True insight is not always dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, often wordless. It comes not through trying harder, but through letting go of trying. You don't discover it in books, or arguments, or theories. You feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the silence between thoughts. That silence is not empty, it's alive. And in that aliveness, you know. This is why meditation doesn't aim to fill you with answers. It doesn't offer solutions. It invites you to drop into being, to experience what's underneath the search, to sit in awareness without needing it to be anything else. Over time, the mind stops reaching, the heart begins to open, and in that openness, there's a kind of understanding that needs no proof. Silent knowing is not mystical, it's natural, but it gets overlooked because it cannot be owned. You can't quote it, you can't display it. It doesn't serve the ego. It just rests quietly at the center of presence, and the more still you become, the more clearly it shines. We often confuse wisdom with information, but information is external. Wisdom is internal. Information can be repeated, wisdom can only be lived. And when you let go of needing to explain everything, even to yourself, you begin to live with more depth. You don't need to define every emotion. You don't need to understand every shift. You trust the movement of life without dissecting it. This is not about rejecting thinking. It's about knowing its limits. When a fire burns, you can study the flame, or you can feel the heat. At some point, you put down the analysis and step closer. Silent knowing is the warmth that meets you when you stop standing back. In daily life, this knowing expresses itself through grounded presence. You enter a room and feel what needs to be said or not said. You listen without planning your response. You respond without rehearsing your role. There's no script, just trust. Not blind belief, but embodied clarity. A kind of subtle confidence that doesn't shout. It simply moves from truth. This presence also changes how you relate to uncertainty. The thinking mind panics when it can't predict. It fills the unknown with stories, but silent knowing isn't threatened by not knowing. It doesn't rush to resolve tension. It stands still in it. It senses that something deeper is at work, even when the surface looks unclear. In this stillness, there's no performance. No need to sound wise, look composed, or prove anything. You drop the persona, you let go of image, you show up as you are. And somehow, that's enough. This kind of wisdom cannot be forced. It comes when the conditions are right. And the primary condition is space, inner space, when you stop crowding your mind with commentary. when you stop explaining your every emotion, when you stop turning every insight into a speech. Sometimes the deepest clarity arises in moments you don't expect. You're washing dishes, walking down the street, sitting quietly, and suddenly something shifts. No words, no reasoning, just a soft realization. You know something not through logic, but through being. And because this kind of knowing doesn't depend on proof, it makes you humble. You don't argue over it. You don't insist others agree. You don't need them to. You simply carry it like still water in your chest. It informs your actions, shapes your speech, and deepens your silence. This inner silence is not the absence of voice. It is the end of grasping. It is the stillness that watches all things pass without needing to capture them. That watches the mind speak without believing everything it says. As practice deepens, you begin to rest more often in this space. You feel less urgency to figure everything out. You start to see that some truths don't have to be spoken to be real. They don't become more true by being said aloud. They simply live inside you, steady and quiet. This quietness becomes your compass. You no longer make decisions just from logic. You sense what feels aligned, what brings peace, what opens your chest, not just what makes sense on paper. You trust this not as impulse, but as inner clarity, not as emotion, but as deep knowing. It also makes space for others to speak. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't interrupt discovery with your conclusions. You become someone who holds space not just with your presence, but with your restraint. You let others find their own clarity without inserting yours. This knowing is generous. It doesn't need credit. It doesn't insist on being seen. It is content to move quietly through your life, guiding without pushing. It appears in moments of real presence and disappears when you try to capture it. And when you look back, you realize some of your wisest choices came not from what you thought, but from what you felt without needing to explain. You trusted the pause. You followed the quiet urge. You said no when you didn't have a reason, and yes when it just felt right. And those moments, though silent, became turning points. The beauty of this wisdom is that it belongs to everyone. It is not a gift for the few. It is your nature, remembered. But you must slow down to hear it. You must stop looking for something impressive. It's not flashy. It's not loud. It's not clever. It's just true. And in the end, the deepest peace may come not from finally understanding life, but from no longer needing to, from resting in the mystery, from standing in the presence of what ice and knowing without needing to say a word. After 3 hours of deep reflection, stories, and ancient insight, one truth rises gently above all. Others letting go is not losing. It is remembering, returning, reconnecting with what has always been here. Stillness, clarity, presence, peace. You've explored how letting go is not weakness, but wisdom, not detachment from life, but intimacy with it. You've seen how freedom begins not by escaping the world, but by loosening the grip on how the world must be. Letting go of control opened space for trust. Letting go of identity revealed your true presence. Letting go of the past softened your story. Letting go of speed gave you breath. Letting go of social scripts reconnected you with your truth. Letting go of suffering, of outcomes, of reaction, of the need to be fixed, of the weight of the future, it all returned you to the same doorway. Right here, right now. This path was never about escaping life. It was about meeting it fully, without clinging. And through that meeting, discovering something beautiful. You don't need to hold everything together to be whole. You were never meant to. Letting go is the beauty of release, of reverence, of love without chains, of wisdom without words. If this journey moved something in you, even a little, share it. Leave a comment with just one thing you're ready to release, or one insight that stayed with you. You never know who your words might help. And if you want to keep walking this path with us, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's more stillness, more stories, and more truth ahead. Until next time, may your next breath be a little lighter. May your next step be a little freer. And may you always remember letting go is how you return home